Hey everyone, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy the audiobooks, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to support us further, consider becoming a Patreon member. As a member, you'll gain the ability to request the next part of a novel audiobook I've uploaded, depending on your Patreon tier.
Vivian preparing dinner in the kitchen was a shock to Hao Ren as she was 100% vampire. Look at the life of a vampire shown in TV shows, dressed in a black gown and red cape, living in a 20,000 square meter castle by the sea with plenty of slaves and treasure. A vampire sleeps from 6 o'clock a.m. to 8 o'clock p.m. A vampire drinks a bottle of 1982 vintage blood once awake and invites other creatures to party in the castle till midnight. This was called a ball. Standing on the porch with a glass of red wine, the vampire will enjoy the sight of the moon until it's time for bed. This is supposed to be the life of a vampire, exciting and grand but low profile. Apparently, broke Vivian was not part of that list. Not only did she not need to drink fresh blood to survive, she could eat the noodles crudely made by Hao Ren. Plus, she was cooking using a stove. Just thinking about all this was enough to make a person's jaw drop. As Vivian served the dishes that she prepared, Hao Ren realized that there were more surprises ahead. Vivian's cooking was not bad in general. However, the menu was peculiar. It consisted of stir-fried eggplant with garlic, green beans with minced garlic and noodles tossed with garlic paste, all prepared with the perfect combination of color, aroma, and taste. The entire living room was filled with the pungent smell of garlic that Hao Ren felt like he was swimming in a sea of garlic. The so-called vampire was at a corner of the dining table, eating cloves of raw garlic. Even normal humans could not have coped with so much garlic. Seeing this, Hao Ren and Lily were stunned. Both looked at Vivian from head to toe and simultaneously asked, "Are you really a vampire?" Vivian's expression immediately turned serious. "Please refer to me as a member of the Blood Clan. This is a very serious issue. Stop being contentious." Hao Ren shouted, unable to take in what he just saw. "So vamp. The Blood Clan is not afraid of garlic. You're eating garlic like rice." Looking at the dishes, Vivian came to understand the situation. "Oh, you meant this. Normal Blood Clan members are not fond of this and lowly vampires can get ill just by the scent of garlic. I've no idea why I'm like this. I just know that I'm unafraid of garlic. When life was hard, even getting a meal was an issue. Who would still be picky about the taste of their food?" Hao Ren was tongue-tied. Touching his nose he asked, "I've been wanting to ask you this. Since you're a vamp Blood Clan member, why are you so broke?" "I've no idea. Ever since I can remember, I haven't been lucky with money. When currency did not exist I lost things. When shells were used as currency I would lose the shells. When coins were used I would lose the coins. Now, I always lose cash. It's difficult looking for a job now or run a business. I was determined to rob someone last year but in the end, I took pity on her and gave her £6 of my own money instead." Vivian threw her arms up as if accepting her bad luck which followed her from the past millennium. Whilst talking, a sense of delight flashed across Vivian's face. Upon searching herself, she found a silver armlet. "I still have some valuable things with me. Look at this armlet. I didn't have the heart to exchange it for money even when I was at my poorest. I found this armlet, which was made from pure silver in a village in Egypt a few hundred years ago. It even protects one from evil spirits." Upon hearing this, Hao Ren was speechless. Vivian then continued, taking out a necklace from her collar. A cross was dangling from the chain. "I got this near the Vatican when I was living in Europe for some time. I had my purse stolen, I lost my job and the place that I was living in caught fire. I could only work odd jobs in a church as I was penniless. The church priest gave me this as a gift since I was hardworking. He even said he blessed this necklace himself. It can also ward off evil spirits. Then there's this piece of wood I found near Mount Wutai. It was a gift from an old Taoist priest. It can also ward off evil spirits. Also, I got this amulet from the Vikings a few hundred years ago after I did them a favor. It really works. It wards off evil spirits. I've concluded that there's a pattern. I'll lose the money that's with me. However, ever since humans used paper and coins as currency, I've never lost any of my other possessions." Hao Ren quietly put down his cutlery and pinched himself as hard as possible. Once he confirmed that he was not in a dream, he stared at Vivian and asked, "Please tell me again, are you really a vampire? How many times do I need to say this? Call me a member of the Blood Clan instead of a vamp." "Fine, forget it. You humans always get confused with this. Why are you concerned about this?" Looking at the vampire in front of him, who was wearing a large number of amulets and protective accessories, she was just wearing a plain black dress, so how did she manage to carry a vast amount of accessories under her clothes? Hao Ren felt like he would have a heart attack soon. "You need protection from evil spirits. You're considered one yourself. Those things you're wearing alone could kill hundreds of vampires." "I have no clue," Vivian answered indignantly. "Well, I'm not afraid of these things. And maybe they can help ward off my bad luck. Even if they don't do that, they make me braver." Lily only raised her head once she finished the food in her bowl. "As a vampire, you should feel embarrassed if you need to wear a cross to feel brave." The silly werewolf was not stunned from Vivian's abnormal ways at all. Her focal point was indeed peculiar. They finished dinner in a weird mood, and Hao Ren felt that he got to know a new Vivian. Not only was this vampire a broke one, she was not afraid of garlic, silver, and the cross itself. She was not even afraid of those objects that warded off evil spirits. She had at least a few pounds worth of these items on her to help ward off her bad luck. A few pounds. This peculiar group welcomed its first peaceful and normal day as everyone went about their own business after dinner. There was a human landlord, also a worker of the space administration, a silly werewolf, a broke vampire, and last but not least a black and white cat named Raleigh. Hao Ren could not help but feel that it was a miracle for the lot of them to be able to live under the same roof. Lily was squatting in the living room watching TV. Yes, squatting. She was squatting like a dog, and Raleigh was beside her. Both looked like siblings. Lily was finally getting used to Raleigh. Although still fidgety and would jump aside if she was in Raleigh's way, at least she was not hiding at the back of the sofa anymore. Feeling energetic, Vivian went out for a stroll. As a nocturnal creature, Vivian's biological clock was most active after sunset. She decided that she would fly back to the city, hoping to find a job. Hao Ren had a rough idea why the vampire was broke and had difficulty in her job hunt. Was it that hard to adjust her biological clock? Who's that crazy to look for a job at 3 in the morning? As Vivian transformed into a bat and disappeared into the dark night, Hao Ren took out a deck chair. He then proceeded to sit at an empty area outside his house. It was a secluded area, and along with it was an exceptionally quiet environment. In front of the apartment was a large vacant lot that no one used. Thus, it had become Hao Ren's property over the years. It was a habit of Hao Ren's to sit there and feel the cool breeze while in deep thought. This natural environment was healthier than sitting in the house with air conditioning. Of course, his main intention was actually to avoid spending time with Lily alone for fear that his intelligence may be affected. The silly werewolf was watching dog feed commercials on TV. Hao Ren felt that even if he hid himself in his bedroom and was segregated by a wall, he would still lose a third of his intelligence. Summer nights in the north were cooler than the south. Reclining on the deck chair in his usual spot and listening to the indistinctive sounds of insects at night, Hao Ren started to feel sleepy. In his semi-conscious state, Hao Ren felt an unfamiliar blow of wind on his cheek. The gust of wind was refreshing yet slightly cold. It was not the type of wind that came from the hustle and bustle of humans in a modern city. This gust of wind woke Hao Ren up completely. He jumped to his feet and folded the deck chair. However, he already had a look of his strange surroundings. Hao Ren got up using both his hands and feet, all the while holding onto his thigh as he mumbled to himself, "Shit, is it even possible to continue my life as a happy earthling?" He was 100% sure that he was still relaxing and enjoying the shade outside his house, surrounded by old streets as well as lanes familiar to him for the past 20 years. The dilapidated house, potholes, and cement roads were vividly within his visual field. He had only squinted slightly when the surrounding environment has changed completely. Hao Ren found himself standing atop a vast prairie. Overlooking the endless expanse was only green grass as tall as his calf. The grass spread out, swayed and danced beneath his feet as the night breeze cooler than that of the cities hit him. Hao Ren tilted his head and looked towards the sky. What he saw was something he had never seen in the city. A clear and pristine sky filled with stars so bright that the concentrated light made it possible for him to view the scene on the prairie clearly. In the distant horizon, two silvery lights of different sizes slowly rose to the sky. A silvery halo could be seen on the edge of the bigger one, 2 moons. I knew I shouldn't have read that many novels. Hao Ren stared at the 2 moons which slowly rose up into the sky. The night was covered with stars he did not recognize, though he did not know many stars back on Earth either. He finally jumped to his feet and exclaimed, "Did I just motherfucking travel through space?" It was not the first time Hao Ren pinched his thigh with so much strength, he could barely walk in order to determine that he was not dreaming. What in the world was in front of him? Could you actually get thrown into a different world while cooling off by the curb? My God, not to mention, he still had 2 monsters at home waiting to fed. Hao Ren's mind was in a mess, running through countless simulations like a revolving lantern. He could think of several classic cases of interworld travel. He then thought of the 2 problems back at home as well as his recently acquired identity as an agent of the Space Administration. Yet, in the end, all his thoughts and ideas just turned into a long sigh. He realized that he could not sit still and wait because he suddenly heard the howling of wolves. Hao Ren bid a final farewell to his recliner chair and walked towards the direction of the 2 bright moons. He could vaguely see the silhouette of buildings in that direction. At least, it was a target he could move towards. Of course, he knew that wandering around like a headless chicken in an unfamiliar environment was not the smartest move. He was either aimlessly wasting strength or he waiting to meet with larger threats. Most importantly, however, factor was the feeling that he had teleported. The process of reaching the place was unusual in itself. Waiting for someone to save him on sight was practically impossible, so he thought he may as well take a look at his surroundings and decide on what to do later. The landing point isn't even reliable, throwing me onto a prairie as big as this without a tree in sight. How am I supposed to survive? The cold night on the prairie was pressing. Hao Ren could only hold onto his arm as he walked and muttered, "Am I destined to eat grass? If I encounter poisonous grass, I'll be dead meat. It'd be great if there was a forest. I'd be able to chop a tree and create a workbench. Then maybe, I'd be able to survive." Minecraft joke. Obviously, Hao Ren was not a qualified interdimension traveler. A few minutes upon his arrival at an unfamiliar environment, his brain had already run wild. These were not at all the qualities displayed by a qualified interworld traveler upon entering unfamiliar territory. One should be calm and collected as well as wise and decisive. However, he just could not control his thoughts from running amok. That would at the very least disperse and reduce the tension plus uneasy feeling that cut right into his bone. He was just a normal person, an obscure citizen muddling through everyday life. Just 3 days ago, his biggest life crisis was not being able to rent out his house. Just a simple citizen, how could you expect him to calm down, become decisive and smart in such a situation? The faint howling of wolves could be heard from a distance, but then again, it could have simply been illusions caused by the great tension he felt. Hao Ren could not help but think of the werewolf with the tiny brain problem back at home. Lily could also howl like that and it definitely sounded much better. It would have been wonderful if that werewolf was there. Although her mental capacity was quite limited, it should have been enough to deal with wild wolves, right? Anyway, he did not even know whether she would be able to get along with Vivian if he did not manage to return. Both of them would have surely demolished the house. He was going to let them demolish it then, since it would no longer be related to him anyway. So, it was with such a chaotic state of mind that Hao Ren walked on a seemingly endless prairie. His surrounding was so vast that he felt as if the scenery around him had not changed at all despite after walking for so long. If not for the reclining chair that had disappeared behind him and the guidance provided by the 2 bright moons ahead, he might have believed that he was just going in circles around the same spot. The surrounding temperature gradually lowered as a windy night on a broad prairie was not something a t-shirt could hold off. At first, Hao Ren felt that the air was fresh and crisp. Yet, as time went by he had begun to miss the slightly hot and polluted air on Earth which surrounded him half an hour ago. At that precise moment, another howl could be heard. This time, it was much closer and as clear as day. It was definitely not an illusion. Hao Ren felt the hair on his back stand. The sixth sense that he had been harboring for the past 25 years instantly kick-started. He realized that he had unknowingly walked into a tall grass area, with grass tall enough to cover his knee. In all directions, glowing green eyes gradually appeared, like they were floating out from the darkness. Shadows of wolves similar to ghosts gradually appeared from within the grass. Hao Ren had no idea how they were able to close the distance that much without him noticing. To be honest, he was completely petrified at that moment. He had seen this scenario before. Lucky enough, despite being a simple and normal citizen, Hao Ren also had a calm and dependable side. He restrained his impulse to run away and scream loudly as he knew that it would only accelerate his death. Hao Ren confronted the wolf pack, thinking hard to find a way out of the situation. His mind was filled with emotions of hopelessness. He had nowhere to vent. Can I get any unluckier? To die in this ridiculous situation, what's up with that? If only he had on him a weapon of defense. Although he knew with certainty that even if he was holding onto the dragon Yenyu spear, it would still be impossible to defeat the 20 to 30 wolves in front of him. However, at least having a weapon would aid in his courage. Unfortunately, after cautiously groping all over his body for a long time, he only found a traditional Nokia. Okay, so this thing is, in a sense, a superweapon. If tied with a stick, it could even possibly become a warhammer. That aside, this was a life and death situation, so we should stop with the jokes. The wolves, of course, did not grant Hao Ren the chance to be lost in his fantasies and conjectures. As soon as he became distracted, the wolf closest to him rushed towards him without a sound. Hao Ren only saw a dark shadow hurling towards him. Its shape seemed to be different from the wolves of Earth. All he could do was subconsciously block it with his arm. Landlord. Landlord. An urging call came by his ear. Hao Ren felt a sharp pain coming from his brain. The whole world suddenly became fuzzy and turned upside down. In a semi-conscious state, he opened his eyes. He saw the familiar street, old house and misty, city night sky that had close to 0 stars as well as Lily's stupid face. Hao Ren breathed in hard. He did not manage to do this as he was rushed by the wolf. After that, he looked around drowsily. So, does this mean I've returned? What do you mean by return? Lily exclaimed, poking Hao Ren's arm before pulling him up. Landlord, you haven't returned to the house in half a day. The one with the wings asked me to come get you, and then I saw you lying on the floor. Oh yes, and moaning in a weird manner. Hao Ren's arm was almost dislocated as he was pulled up by the mighty yet silly werewolf. Whatever the outcome, he was wide awake at that moment. He noticed that his body was fine, and as he turned his head around, saw that the recliner had at some point fallen on the floor. With that, he concluded that the unbelievably realistic, interdimensional travel experience was only a dream. He was not sure if wanted to cry or laugh. However, wasn't that dream a little too real? It's all right, I just had a dream. Hao Ren waved at Lily, slightly touched that he still had 2 troublemakers at home who cared about him. If only they would stop fighting each other, that would have been so much better. Just as Hao Ren waved his hand, he noticed something sticking out from the gaps of his tightly clenched fist, an after effect of his nightmare, a handful of black, wolf fur. Fuck. Hao Ren jumped up and threw the wolf fur away as if they were burning coal. What the hell? Under the street lights, Hao Ren picked up the wolf fur which he found on the ground. Despite being drenched in cold sweat, he managed to regain his composure quickly thanks to the training he had in numerous past encounters. He first wanted to make sure that there were no other suspicious signs within the vicinity, a lesson he learned while spending the previous 2 days with Lily and Vivian. The presence of the other kind could usually be detected simply by identifying the characteristic signs and phenomena. For example, the breath and beastly smell of a werewolf or the blood-tinged chill of a vampire. He felt that the dream had to somehow be related to the other kind. After all, he had bumped into many of them during the last couple of days, although his 6th sense detected no trace of any anomalies. Landlord. Lily looked at him, her eyes appeared unusually bright and spooky in the dark. What's wrong? She asked. Did you find anything amiss? Hao Ren knew that the wolf was a highly vigilant creature. He could still vividly remember the moment of the wolf's attack in his dream. Lily got down on the floor and sniffed around carefully. After that, she got up and shook her head. None that I could find. Everything is as usual. You saw something unusual. Never mind, let's head back. Hao Ren took the wolf fur in his hand as he headed back home. Lily carried the deck chair and followed cluelessly from behind. Back in the living room, Hao Ren sat on the sofa looking solemn and quiet. Sitting across him were Lily and Vivian, who did not have a clue what was brewing in his mind. An old coffee table had been placed in the middle by Hao Ren, as the previous one was wrecked by Lily and Vivian earlier on. Placing the wolf fur on the table, Hao Ren confessed to Vivian, "I saw something strange." He talked about the strange dream he had in great detail. He told them especially about the vast grassland and 2 silver moons, hanging in the sky. "I got this when I woke up from the dream. I may have taken a shortcut to the other side or mastered reality warping superpowers," he joshed, pointing at the wolf fur. Vivian did not find it amusing. She raised her eyebrows while picking up some of fur from the table. "It has the smell of an animal, not of black magic. This is definitely animal hair. Hey, big dog. Can you please confirm this?" "Okay." Lily took the wolf fur. "It smells very different from what I know. It has a different scent, the smell of another city, a mixture of soil and grass in it. This subtle variance can only be picked up by werewolves." Then suddenly, it hit her. She banged the table as she lashed out at Vivian. "Wait a minute, who did you just call a big dog? Oh, come on, be gentle." Hao Ren pleaded. The old table could have met with the same fate as the tea table if Lily was in a transformed state instead. He turned to Vivian. "So, what do you think? Was it some kind of magic? It's pretty simple to explain if it's just a dream. Sorcery and hypnotism could have achieved the same thing." Vivian's eyebrows were still raised. "I could build a dream world big enough for hundreds to dream in without them realizing it was a dream. If one was creative enough, the person would believe he had made it to the other side. But I still can't explain the object you brought out from the dream. As far as I know, at least, there isn't any magic which could have done that. It couldn't possibly be magic. The dark side is a much more complicated world than I had imagined. Maybe it could be this." Lily eagerly interjected. "First, he was induced into a premeditated dream by way of sorcery or hypnosis, and the wolf fur could have been planted in his hand while he was asleep." "Oh please, can you say something more constructive?" Vivian chimed in before Lily could finish her sentence. However, Hao Ren found that what Lily said was completely plausible. Her simple mind aside, her theory was a perfect explanation for what could have been an unsolvable mystery. Sometimes complex questions had simple answers. Nonetheless, Lily had already ruled out the involvement of the other kind, so her argument that it was a premeditated act did not hold up. "I'm sure that what I got into was of something unusual, as sure as I am that God made little green apples." Hao Ren sighed. "That's just fate. Whatever comes, let it come, but before that, I need to take a break." Both Lily and Vivian had learned that Hao Ren was conned into signing a fishy employment agreement with the self-proclaimed goddess. Vivian was a smart girl, way smarter than Lily. She could see in Hao Ren the quality of extraordinary adaptability and guts, as well as the ability to think on his feet despite his humble background as a sluggish youth who wanted no trouble. Yet, Vivian did not know any ways to make him a superhuman overnight. "Did Raven 12345 leave you any cheat codes or something?" Lily asked as she laid her face on the table. "I read from human novels that if you work for a god, the god will provide you with some kind of personal protective gears." She may have forgotten. "I didn't ask either," he said as it just crossed his mind. "I'll ask when I see her. Anyway, I tried to call but I couldn't reach her cell phone. I guess another trip to that place is necessary. I have a goddamn feeling that the Space Administration is a broken reed. You already had your first strange dream. You need to fix the problem right at the source. I think it's a day late and $1 short now. As per sorcery norms, you'll continue to experience the same dream again unless you're a bullfrog that doesn't sleep." As Vivian talked, she slowly shapeshifted into a vampire. "I'll give you an amulet. It will protect you from whatever sorcery or black magic." The many talismans she wore caught Hao Ren's eyes. "Do those things even work?" he asked cheekily. "Who said that I was going to give you that?" Vivian's eyebrows were raised. "What I mean is the power of the blood clan." Without hesitation, Vivian bit her finger and a drop of golden red blood was seen coming out from her fingertip. "Come over, I'm going to rub it on the back of your hand. It's powerful enough to stop the worst sorceress dream." Hao Ren hesitantly reached out and looked on as Vivian rubbed the blood onto his hand. Legend has it that vampire blood can help turn humans into vampires. So, Am I being turned right now? Not in a million years, she sneered. Humans believe that a vampire bite is the vampire's way to reproduce. If that's true, we wouldn't have to endure the persecution from the monster hunters and the church. We would have taken over the world since the Bronze Age. While relating the history of humans' brutal persecution of the vampires, Vivian, as a vampire herself, did not show signs of hostility towards Hao Ren. That's impossible. Vivian yelled as she was shocked to see the drop of blood had disappeared the moment it made contact with Hao Ren's hand. The blood was completely absorbed. Vivian was persistent. She squeezed out another drop of flesh blood and applied it onto the back of Hao Ren's hand. Lily joined them curiously as they fixed their eyes on the drop of blood expectantly. The blood emanated a golden-red halo as it wriggled on the surface of the skin for a few seconds before collapsing quickly on its own and disappearing before their eyes. It looks like it's being absorbed. Hao Ren flinched and scratched the back of his hand. He was shocked as the blood on his hand had come to life. He managed not to shake it off, knowing that Vivian, the vampire, would not harm him. I felt nothing, just a little itchy and cool sensation in the beginning. That's normal because the body temperature of one from the blood clan is a few degrees lower than a human's. Vivian looked at her finger. The tiny bite wound had already healed itself. She was hesitant for a moment, after which, she took another bite and squeezed out another drop of blood. Let's try this once last time then, I'll need to conserve my precious life fluid. Come on, it's just a teeny tiny drop of blood. Lily, as mischievous as ever, seized the opportunity to mock her. A drop of blood is still blood. Vivian hit back. Back in the days when I was not yet adapted to human food, I fed on fresh blood. I was always being watched by monster hunters while I was out for blood. I was so broke and couldn't even afford to keep a blood slave. I even had to save my vital fluid during the time of the month just to make ends meet. You have no idea how the seamy side of life is unless you've lived it. Hao Ren could not take it anymore. He butt in before things got out of hand. All right, we can picture it in our brains. Stop wailing about your miserable past so openly. You might expose my weaknesses. Landlord, how about waiving a month's rental for me? Lily jested. I was talking to Vivian, mind you. Amid the brouhaha, Vivian tested her blood on Hao Ren again, murmuring some ancient incantations. Hao Ren felt the chill and stink of blood again. The blood wriggled for a moment on his skin before disappearing just like before. The connection's lost. Vivian frowned. This has never happened before. The blood clan have a live link with their blood, sort of like a communication link. The link stays connected as long as the blood isn't actively cast away. Then what? Hao Ren scratched his face. Can I still count on you? He asked. Maybe we should try Lily's blood. Vivian's eyebrows waggled as she turned her eyes on Lily. Her blood may work. A werewolf's blood. Lily was surprised by the suggestion. I didn't know that my blood could be of use. No, I mean, haven't you heard the Chinese saying, a black dog's blood can break the power of evil spells? The two supergirls were at it again, fighting like cats and dogs. Meanwhile, Hao Ren looked on with no intention to break up the fight. He only said, you break it, you pay for it. He was referring to the things in the house and his old table. Those 6 words did wonders. The ruckus stopped. Hao Ren looked at his hands. They were no different from any other hands. He was curious as to how the vampire's blood could be absorbed by his skin. The outcome was unlike any magical power depicted in the vampire movies. It seemed like it could not even be compared to human blood. Of course, movies were not the right places to dig if one wanted the truth, but, as far as the blood clan was concerned, the magical power was as real as it got. At the very least, human blood would normally never come to life and wriggle on its own. The blood clan's mark is not working in this case. Vivian looked at Hao Ren as if she had more tricks up her sleeve. You've got to trust me this time. Be ready for the magic of blood clan, without blood as a medium. Show me what you've got. Hao Ren giggled. You're quite a nice guy. Vivian flipped her hand open as she rattled on. Most humans were not as compliant as you are unless they were simpletons. When I was in Europe 300 years ago, people over there would rather die than give in to my blood magic. They were such pigheads. Hao Ren muttered as he wondered whether Vivian had forgotten how vampires terrorized humans with their magic. Vivian signaled Hao Ren to sit still while she drew something in the air with her finger. Hao Ren gaped because for the first time ever, he was about to witness true magic. He was amazed at the sight of her finger moving swiftly and forming a bloody red trail of light. She wrote row after row of strange, illegible words. She would wipe off what she had written before continuing on to the next row. As she was doing that, Hao Ren suddenly became skeptical. He found that her so-called magic of the Blood Clan was nothing more than a text-memorizing gimmick. He did not feel any magical power apart from the eye-catching special effects. Her finger moved faster as she wrote. She kept wiping off the sentence before starting the next one. Again and again, it went on. Hao Ren was cheesed off and could not hold back. "Are you done yet? Wait a minute, that one isn't right. I have to rewrite it." Hao Ren was speechless. Only then, it began to sink in. The reason behind her repetitive writing and wiping was simply because she was making mistakes. That's not right either. Vivian had not noticed that Hao Ren was already annoyed. She kept on writing for a while before shaking her head. Then she said, "It couldn't possibly be a mistake. I have revised the sentence 3 times in 3 different structures. Landlord, do you feel drowsy, peaceful, or relaxed? There is a peaceful feeling in my heart, but I guess your magic has got nothing to do with it. You, the big dog over there." Vivian turned to Lily. "Freeze." Vivian waved her hand and the bloody red trails of words were transformed into a cloud of fog. Lily fell, snoring on the table as the fog engulfed her. That was intense. Her defense is rather weak. Vivian frowned again as she spoke to Hao Ren. "I have no idea why my blood magic doesn't work on you." Hao Ren was wide-eyed. He stared at his own hands in disbelief. "Am I something I don't know? Am I immune against magic by default?" "Yeah, I guess so because your nerves are damaged and you're a slowpoke. Hey, mind you, you still owe me some money. Jokes aside, immunity against magic isn't possible as far as I know. I'm sensitive to all living things and I can sense that you're definitely just a normal human being. You weren't even immune against the chill I created. You may get your answer from Raven 12345 when you see her. Anyway, as far as your agreement with her goes, I sense that there is something fishy going on. There could be changes by the time you return. Until then, you shall use my amulet." After all the commotion, things were back to square one as blood magic was nothing more than a juggling act. All he had was a piece of amulet, the 8 trigrams, which was a mystic tablet Vivian claimed to have originated from Mount Wutai. Vivian gave the 8 trigrams to Hao Ren. It was one of the amulets in her vast collection of mystic items. Her concern for him had touched his heart. However, did the 8 trigrams work? For 3 consecutive nights, Hao Ren did not have a bad dream and he firmly believed that the 8 trigrams Vivian gave him had nothing to do with it. First of all, he knew for a fact that the tablet of 8 trigrams was not an amulet but a tool to map feng shui energy. Second of all, he found a small print at the edge of the trigrams. It was the name of the manufacturer, which appeared to be from the Sichuan province. However, he kept mum about it. Although he was relieved by the absence of bad dreams, the mystery of the wolf still hung over his head. He had a feeling that unusual creatures could be watching him in the dark. Nevertheless, he was an optimist and decided to meet Raven 12345 again to talk it over. Until then, he resolved to let nothing bother him. In fact, he had attempted to look for Raven 12345 a couple of days ago but he did not manage to see the weird goddess. Hao Ren followed the same route. He took a bus to Bastard Barrio and reached the telephone pole with the Chinese medicine bill on it. He was then teleported to the inverted mansion somewhere in another dimension. So, he figured that since he could come back to the mansion the same way he did the first time, it was not a dream. However, he did not manage to see Raven 12345. There were only a few blue, foggy figures patrolling the property. It was obvious that they were slaves working for Raven 12345. The blue, foggy figures seemed to be highly intelligent creatures but they spoke no human language. Naturally, there was no communication between them. One of the blue, foggy figures then handed Hao Ren a note. It was from Raven 12345. She said that she went on a business trip to the Centaurus constellation for a few days. If she found the trip enjoyable it might be a few years before she would be coming back. Right after that, Hao Ren was ushered out of the mansion. She's being absurd. He browsed some magazines in the living room with the air conditioning on full blow. His mind was still on his last trip to the bastard barrio office of the Space Administration. The trip left a bad taste in his mouth. He could not wait to see Raven 12345 to clear all his doubts. He felt like he was being engulfed by a thick fog. He had lost all direction, and just did not know where to start. Raven 12345, the nutty goddess, was the only person who could help clear his head. Her obsessive-compulsive disorder would have driven him crazy if not for his good emotional intelligence. While Vivian and Lily were around, he had the opportunity to learn a thing or two about them and the other kind. The other kind was a term Hao Ren randomly chose to refer to Vivian and Lily the day he met them. They both seemed to be comfortable with it. It was not possible to trace back the origin of the other kind. They existed alongside human civilization and there were various records as well as legends about them. They were brutally persecuted by the church during medieval times as well as by the Chinese dynasties. Their stories were then incorporated into literature and folklore. For people living in this modern age, creatures like vampires, werewolves, monsters, and spirits of the dead are merely fictitious characters in horror stories and thrillers. However, they appeared in the flesh and were seen by various eyewitnesses during the earlier periods. The other kind were treated as a threat to humanity. Though there was no account of the earliest conflict, the war between the other kind and humans began long before recorded history. In spite of that, stories of friendship did exist. During the caveman era, they were depicted in the drawings of monsters, gods, or half-beast, half-human creatures on the cave walls. Some of them were results of creative exaggeration and humans with structural birth defects due marrying their cousins. The rest were truly the other kind. They were a part of early human history. Their role was that of the antagonists. Vivian was from that early era but her memory was messed up probably because she was a bit long in the tooth. Nevertheless, she still recalled bits and pieces. One bit which Hao Ren heard about was that of Zeus, god of the skies and thunder. During the early ages, the other kind had many unfair advantages over humankind. They had super perception, longevity, 9 lives, and were also highly intelligent. The rise of humankind's absolute rule, however, had driven the other kind into becoming monsters of terror. Despite that, there were exceptions. The exact cause of their fall was not clear, but there were 3 possible reasons. Firstly, as humankind became more civilized and developed, they started developing various tools as well as weaponry, becoming more united and powerful. The widely scattered creatures were no match for humans on their own. In the end, they were defeated one by one. Secondly, their downfall was due to some mysterious entity, and thirdly, the emergence of monster hunters. The third factor was also the most impactful. Monster hunters had a partial human lineage, but no one could accurately tell their exact origin. Their emergence saw a worldwide hunt for the other kind. The term monster hunter did exactly exist in the beginning. It was only coined by the European Council during the medieval period and popularized thereafter. The European continent was the last place on Earth still ravaged by the other kind then. Most of them had already been wiped out from the rest of the world by the Human Monster Hunter Alliance. Terms for various species which constituted the other kind and the term monster hunter were finalized during that time in Europe. From being kings of the world to fugitives, the other kind were edged out from the world's history. This alternate history completely destroyed Hao Ren's worldviews. He then started to show more interest in the 2 supergirls in his house. Lily was a relatively young werewolf, dozens of years at most. She was all brawn and no brains. She did not have much stories of werewolves to tell. Vivian, on the other hand, was on the opposite end of the spectrum. She was from the prestigious blood clan who had lived as long as the existence of human civilization. Oddly, she barely remembered her own stories except bits and pieces of them. Also, she slept anywhere she felt like. She was unlike her kind, which were hell-bent on terrorizing humans. She spent most of her time battling her own bad days. Suffice to say, as far as vampires went, she was the black sheep of the blood clan. To humankind, however, she was a human-friendly girl. All in all, she fell between 2 stools. For a moment, Hao Ren imagined his everyday life would be undone by the arrival of his 2 special guests, his idyllic and simple life, gone with the wind. Images of him fighting off combat police or superheroes replayed in his mind again and again. However, after a few days, things remained the same. Nothing seemed to have changed. The arrival of the two ladies did zilch in changing his routine. Lily's daily routine mainly consisted of sleeping, eating, even more eating, getting into a brawl with Vivian, and writing stuff. The lass was quite an accomplished columnist after all. Basically, her life was simple yet colorful, and she seemed to be enjoying it up to that point. As for Vivian, well, she had a more exciting tale compared to Lily. Sleeping, eating, fighting with Lily, job hunting, getting fired, job hunting again and getting fired again, ad infinitum. To be frank, Hao Ren could only sigh at her streak of bad luck. 3 new jobs in the span of 3 days, imagine that. Yet, Hao Ren could not help but be amazed by her resourcefulness. Getting a job that quickly in such an unfamiliar place was no easy feat. That said, the longest she managed to hold a job thus far was about 3 hours. It was a shame that Hao Ren did not have the chance to witness her bad luck unfold. Only towards the end of the day, when she came home looking worse than a sack of potatoes, that he knew she screwed up somewhere. He thought he could maybe peek in at her workplace sometime, just to see how she would end up getting fired. Living with the two ladies up until that point was about as normal as one could get. Sure, they had their quirks, but they were not outrageous enough to rattle Hao Ren. One would think that a vampire like Vivian would be out bloodletting every now and then, or a werewolf like Lily would be howling at the moon and be out chasing rabbits. Yet, neither of this actually happened. Quite the opposite, they actually went on about their lives as how you would expect normal human would. It seemed to be their way of life since they were young. In a sense, Hao Ren was both disappointed and grateful. At least he did not have to contend with any combat police or superheroes. Although the effects of the weird dream had somewhat dissipated, it still left Hao Ren with goosebumps whenever he recalled it. There was nothing much he could do but wait for the return of the weird goddess. At the same time, he also slowly got used to the routines of his new guests at home. Lily was already up and about in the morning. She was busy choosing her outfit of the day. This lass may have seemed a little dumb at times, but she was pretty much what you would expect of a usual girl. Maybe except when Raleigh decided to pounce on her. She would end up on all fours in a fright. Going out? Hao Ren asked out of curiosity as he saw her milling about. Yep. I got a patient to see today, Lily replied as she tidied her dress. Things seem to be going on pretty nicely in this town. I've been doing good in my writings, rentals easy peasy, and I got my first patient too. Vivian, who was tidying up the guest hall, perked up when she heard Lily. You? A doctor? Hao Ren realized that Vivian did not know that Lily was actually working. She was not around when Lily first introduced herself. Aside from butting heads every now and then, both of them never actually took the time to know each other. Hao Ren thought it was a good time to clarify things. Lily's a freelance veterinarian. Lily suddenly turned towards Vivian. She stuck her chest out and with gusto said, I'm a certified professional, you know. She grinned. Been so for about 10 years now. I'm also a bona fide columnist. I've been written from the time of the Republic Star. You know Zhou Shuren. I'm a good friend of his. He. Hao Ren was slouching on his chair and reading some magazines at that time. The shock he received from Lily's proclamation made him topple with a stunned look. What? I'm a professional. Lily blinked at the sight of his reaction. When I was living in the midst of human society, writing was my rice bowl. I only became a vet some years back. I have actually done some treatment before, you know. I'm not talking about that. Hao Ren said. All this while, he thought Lily was not the sharpest tool in the shed and did not pay her much attention. You said, from the time of the Republic. Yep, I did write a lot then. Did the people of the Republic not read? Lily titled her head. I've been alive for quite some time already. Don't tell me you've forgotten all about that. Hao Ren was stuck in a stupor. He only came to realize how different these special beings were compared to humans. Even for the dumb werewolf, her past was quite a revelation. True, he actually heard Lily and Vivian talk about their past before, but he never paid much attention to them as their stories sounded more like fairy tales more often than not. It was only then did he actually realize the vast gap between their generations. Seeing how stunned Hao Ren was at Lily's past, Vivian, a very much older being, was naturally unhappy about it. She forcefully dragged Lily to the side and sneered, Listen now, you furball. Have you actually fought with Akiris asterisk before, or kicked Wodi asterisk and Kaiser asterisk into a moat? Have you kicked the Flame Emperor into, wait, I haven't done that yet. And oh. The Yellow Emperor, what a man. Hao Ren sighed deeply. The conversation between the two supernatural beings was clearly much more engaging than any book in the world. Lily did not even blink when she heard Vivian's achievements. So what? Did fighting with Akiris earn you money? Did kicking Wodi and Kaiser into the moat fill your pockets? Why not? I charged for that. Then where's your sack of gold? Let's talk about something else. Hao Ren was now having cold feet. The conversation that took place that day clearly could not be disclosed anywhere else. The world would be in a riot at such a revelation. Vivian may have acted like a potato sack, but she was definitely no slouch during her heyday. If the tales of their past were true, what else had the history of human civilization been neglecting? Vivian's Achilles heel was clearly her luck with money or anything related to it. Even Lily, the idiot, picked up on it and quite happily reveled in the schadenfreude. Vivian knew she had no second word when it came to that, so she just quietly went about cleaning the house. Hao Ren was actually surprised that Vivian actually asked him for that. At least she was aware of her bad luck and did the housework to shave off part of the food and rental expenses. Her attitude was another pleasant surprise for Hao Ren. He did have his doubts about letting her do such menial jobs, but Vivian was adamant. Well, it was not cheap to have a live-in maid, let alone such a pretty one. Thus, it was a win-win situation for Hao Ren. Lily was by then out and about. Hao Ren did not even have the chance to ask her how she got a veterinarian gig in a place foreign to her. However, he could pretty much picture Lily squatting by the local strays and chatting with them, almost kin-like. With such talents, it was no wonder why she was such a spectacular vet. After all was said and done, Hao Ren proceeded to get back to reading his crumpled magazine when his mobile phone rang. Hao Ren felt that something was evidently off. When he grabbed the device, the only thing that appeared on screen was a series of numbers. 000000012345. The loony goddess finally decided to show up again. Clutching the buzzing mobile phone, Hao Ren was very much agitated. His thoughts jumbled, heck, even his hands felt like a wobbly mess. All this while, the old Nokia was vibrating furiously in his hand. A normal phone call wouldn't have elicited such a reaction, but God knows how Raven 12345 did it. The buzzing of the phone was akin to a boombox. Much of it was to make sure Hao Ren did not miss her call, but the buzzing could even be heard a few blocks away. Hello. Hao Ren took the call, weary of any pranks Raven 12345 would pull to scare the daylight out of him. Yo. Hao Ren, still alive? Did you take good care of the new guests? Raven 12345 spoke chirpily. It seems like she was still her usual self. I messed up the other time. It seems that you are not the only one to have a furball of a werewolf at your place. I think you have someone from the Blood Clan as well. Is she there? How's things going? Nothing wrong, I hope. Was out doing stuff earlier. Oh, let me tell you about the Blue Horn Nebula. Hao Ren was pretty much floored by the pace Raven 12345 went about blabbering. Thankfully he still held on to his wits and interrupted the loony goddess. Hold on, I need to see you about something. Something? Was it? Raven 12345 sounded puzzled. Oh, you mean your salary? I haven't actually thought about that. Oh wait, or is it about your benefits? It's not even the end of the month yet. Can you please let me speak? Hao Ren finally snapped and yelled at the phone. He regained his train of thoughts not long after and quickly cowered. He had just raised his voice at the loony goddess. Some random thunderbolt would probably be striking him down any time now. Lucky for Hao Ren, the sky was clear. At least he won't be zapped by a thunderbolt this time around. Raven 12345 demurred for a moment and chirpily went, oh, sorry about that, got all excited from that trip. Go on, he. Hao Ren wiped off his cold sweat, thanking Lady Luck for Raven 12345's apparent good mood. Right. I still can't make heads of tails after you left so suddenly. I ran into something really weird, and there's that dream too. Raven 12345 was silent, for once, when Hao Ren told her about the reality-altering dream that he had. Well, until Hao Ren finished talking at least. Oh, slurp. You had a dream like that, huh? Slurp. That complicates things a bit, slurp. Why not you drop by my place, slurp? What's going on over there? Hao Ren wondered at the distorted speech. Slurp, oh, I'm having cup noodles. Raven 12345 continued eating. I forgot about breakfast earlier. Good Lord above, did she just went to prepare her cup noodle when he was talking about the dream? Hao Ren recollected his thoughts, and after confirming with Raven 12345 the meeting spot, he went out after changing into a more proper attire. Vivian was preparing some light snacks for Raleigh and saw Hao Ren getting ready. Heading out to see her. Hao Ren nodded, went on, oh yeah, I might be late. If Lily's back by then, just grab your meals outside, or you can have food delivery. The number's on the calendar, that's the only shop that delivers up to here. Vivian heard Lily's name and frowned. Before she could speak, Hao Ren went, oh, don't give me that. Your food is being paid for by Lily. You're already piss poor as it is. Vivian was silent. The vampire who had lived for ages, the one who fought with Akiris, had a surprisingly mild temper. Hao Ren felt that he understands her better now, and the sense of awe and fear he had for her before have pretty much faded away. After reminding Vivian to feed Raleigh lunch, Hao Ren left home and was headed for the Space Administration office at Bastard Barrio. The imposing white villa was the same as a few days before. The servants in the house kept the building spick and span while the owner was away. Hao Ren was running all the way under the hot sun, and gave a sigh of relief when he was teleported to the fountain in front of the villa. As the building was in a different dimension, it was neither hot nor cold, and the air was surprisingly fresh. Hao Ren did entertain some thoughts about staying longer. Oh, you're here. Raven 12345 appeared behind him. Hao Ren quickly turned about and saw the silver-haired lady holding an odd-looking giant blade walking out from the garden. Her clothing was stained with mud and grass. I was trimming the hedgerows, Raven 12345 said with an accomplished grin while lifting the 2-meter-long silver blade. Hao Ren was fixated at it and she chuckled, it's awesome, yeah. This blade is a memento, you know. There's nothing like it amongst the ravens. She turned around and waved at Hao Ren to head into the house. Let's head in and talk about the stuffs you had ran into. Hao Ren nodded and quickly followed behind. Both of them walked into Raven 12345's office. It was pretty much the same, except for the pile of empty noodle cups piling up by her desk. Hao Ren really wondered if he should be taking Raven 12345 seriously at this point. For such a godly being, she sure ain't eating like one. Raven noticed Hao Ren's gaze and brushed it aside. Well, I'm done eating those. Hao Ren sighed and went to sit on the sofa facing Raven 12345 and pulled out a small case that contained a ball of black fur. This was what I told you about. It had just appeared in my hand when I woke up from that nightmare. Lily took a good sniff at it and was sure it wasn't something from the human world. Raven 12345 took the ball of fur and snapped her fingers. A series of bright blue lines appeared out of nowhere and quickly assembled themselves into a container. The black fur floated within the container and slowly let out a puff of gray smoke. Hao Ren was taken aback by the scene. Well, I guess she ain't all bluster, he thought to himself. What he just saw clearly looks way stronger than Vivian's blood arts, at least when it comes to the magic circle formation. Ah, so it came from that world. Raven 12345 mumbled as she looked at the last of the fur being disintegrated. From where you say? Hao Ren interjected. The dream world. But it doesn't concern you now, at the very least. You won't be able to deal with this sort of matter anyway, not at your level. Raven 12345 shook her head, looking serious. I'll pass this on to those at the Shadow City HQ. This world is nothing but trouble and the guys over at the administration had been keeping a watchful eye on it for a long time. She saw Hao Ren's perplexed look and pulled out a silver hexagonal item and pushed it towards him. You clearly don't know much. Take it, it's an investigator's mobile data terminal, MDT. Just got it for you earlier. It's pretty much like Wikipedia. You can find out more about the SOPs, the dimensional navigation map and table, and your access level. You're still under probation, so I guess much of it is still beyond you. But it's good to read up in advance. Hao Ren snapped out of his stupor when he saw the silvery item flying his way and caught it just in time. After digesting what Raven 12345 just said, he realized, well, at least I've got my monthly pay this time. Hao Ren toyed around with the silver device in his hand. He was both excited and yet worried. The device was about palm-sized and had a silver glow to it. Yet, it did not feel metallic when held. It was warm, probably not a metal from this world. It had a very fine hexagonal edge, and was barely a few millimeters thick. Hao Ren could see some light pulsing within the device, as it was a living, breathing being. He gave the surface of the device a rub and it activated with a sudden bright flash. A holographic menu popped out of the ether and took Hao Ren by surprise. It was to Hao Ren's credit that he did not just toss the device instinctively. He held it tightly and stared at the hologram. There was a blue cross-shaped sigil revolving slowly in the middle of the hologram. Beneath the icon was a line of words: Space Administration, EN35 node, World AZ655, General Use of MDT. Access verified. Standing by. Full Mandarin interface, idiot-proof navigation, even a dummy can master this. Raven 12345 pointed towards the MDT, drawing Hao Ren's attention. This device here contains all you need to know about your work. Oh, and there's the introduction about the Imperial Space Administration, plus some basic information about the Empire. Also, there's more information about worlds, space lanes, world codes, authority levels, material distribution list, support application, and more that you'll need to learn. It's a bit too much of a hassle to explain all of it to you. Go read it up, Raven 12345 snickered, well, digesting all of this. You should be done with Module 1 of the tutorial by now, and on to the second module. All Hao Ren saw was despair. He just managed to scrape through school, and now he's back to it again. What is this though? Hao Ren, trying to distract himself from the amount of studying he needed to do, pointed towards the floating blue cross-shaped sigil. He did not know what it symbolized, but was pretty sure it was a pretty big deal. He saw the same shapes within Raven 12345's villa and on the magical servants as well. Hao Ren then poked at the hologram and his fingers went through the image. Well, guess it is not manipulated by touch. Raven 12345's expression became serious all of a sudden and Hao Ren took a step back. He never thought that such a whimsical goddess could swing from one end of a spectrum of gravity to the other. Raven 12345 stared deeply at Hao Ren, as though wanting to drill her thoughts directly into his skull. This is the insignia of the Xiling Legion, the Empire's emblem, the mark of the Xiling civilization. It represents the Xiling Empire. Well, you're new, so you might not grasp the significance of the insignia. Just know that it is a very important symbol, that throughout the ether, countless of races are under her protection, and her unnumbered legions fighting for her glory. Hao Ren could only nod at what Raven 12345 just told him. Sensing the mood had gotten severe, she tapped her forehead and went, what am I doing drowning you in this so early in the morning? Remember, no matter what sort of perils you are facing, or what sort of troubles you find yourself in, as long as you see this insignia, know that you are with family. Understand? Hao Ren responded with a quick nod. How do I use this again? Just put your hand on one of the edges, and control it mentally. It will automatically act on your directive without fail. Raven 12345 said as she guided Hao Ren on how to use the device. Of course, you might need some time to get used to it. Its reaction time is very fast, and the AI within is as potent as a human's mind, so it will automatically help you out when you've messed up. It's nothing really. Try activating the system, and say, I'm a noob. Hao Ren blinked at the device. The only thought that swirled in his head was, my god, this is some high-tech stuff. I thought the Xiling apostles are gods, why would you need such high-tech stuff? Hao Ren asked while trying to communicate with the device. Raven 12345 looked at him curiously. How is science and magic any different? The Xiling gods went on both paths, and used what was useful. After all, these are just tools to control reality. Throw that gadget you have right now to a bunch of cavemen and they'll take it as a gift from the gods. That being said, I don't fancy all this high-tech stuff, I still prefer my magical items. It's a pity that you won't be able to use them. Hao Ren did not pay much attention to Raven 12345 at that point, as he had managed to activate the device. A series of holographic images refreshed at a very fast pace, but Hao Ren was not overwhelmed by it. The way the images were formed and refreshed matched his mental agility, as if the device was capable of scanning his brain and determine how it could best absorb new information. Hao Ren's eyes quickly scanned through the data screens that was centered around him. He appreciated the fact that when he needs new information, it will be automatically brought to him in the most efficient manner. Hao Ren thought he would not be able to manipulate such an advanced device. He quickly realized something. For such an expansive, multiversal civilization, to create an easy-to-use device was as easy as 1, 2, 3. He concluded that the ease of usage only meant that the inner workings of this device is very much complicated. If he were to pry the device open, God knows who would be able to put it back together. What does this request support button do? Hao Ren asked as he saw it while browsing through the database. The holographic screen stopped at the menu and displayed a huge list of pictures and the corresponding information. It looked like a lot of them are weapons or troop lists, but most of them were grayed out. You really thought that the inspectors are lone wolves? Or that taking care of a few special creatures at home constitutes the whole of the job scope? Raven 12345 snickered. Just wait till you go official. Being an inspector is no easy job. What if I were to send you out to pacify a rebellion at Centauri? Or to mediate a military ceasefire in the Scorpio stars? At this point, you'd be begging for combat support. When you're about to get killed, by all means use it. Of course, such a request would need the necessary authorization, and authorization can only be gained by a strict assessment. Of course, we would not be giving access to lethal arms to fresh bloods. Well, lethal arms it may be, it's still just child's play to us. Let's say if one of this were to land on Earth, you'll be looking at centuries-long nuclear winter. Hao Ren gulped as he heard what Raven 12345 had just said. This job would be the death of him. He stuttered. No quitting. Raven 12345 grinned. Even if you were to die, your spirit will be within my grasp. I just need to get you a new body and you're as good as new. It took me so much effort to get a new employee, you think I'd let you go? Hao Ren's face soured at the thought. Oh, don't give me that. Raven 12345 teleported to his side and scared the living daylight out of Hao Ren. It's not my nature to sugarcoat the reality. You'll find out soon enough that this is an opportunity that most would kill for. As long as you don't screw up, you'll live for, quite long. Inspectors are not military personnel. We won't be sending you out to fight wars. Hao Ren wanted to speak but was totally overwhelmed by her presence. He slid the MDT into his pocket. There will be much reading and researching to do later. Let's talk about the nightmare, he said as he dropped resignedly back on the sofa. I felt as if you were hiding things from me. I may be naive, but please don't take me for a fool. At least let me know the things I need to know. Raven 12345 took a glance at Hao Ren and sighed. All right, since you are this insistent. I'll let you in on a bit more. Hao Ren was sitting upright facing Raven 12345, awaiting her explanation. In fact, he did not, at all, expect her to readily tell him everything from the get-go. He had a strong impression that Raven 12345 was egocentric and uncompromising since the day she forced him to board the boat. However, this woman did not seem so unkind now. The world is more complicated than you think, said Raven 12345 while she sat right on the desk, ignoring her image, making her look like a boss. We are looking at a realm where an unknown race, unknown society, or even another unknown space coexist with our world. While most people are oblivious of it, a tiny minority of the uniquely gifted people, which are rare, are able to get there, the plane of dreams. Hao Ren swallowed hard subconsciously. Raven 12345's serious demeanor had really stressed him out. Of course, I was the one who decided to call it the plane of dreams just recently. Before this I used to call it the illusory space, and then I changed it to the mirror world, and then the phantom universe. It used to be called the second world as well, said Raven 12345 while scratching her head. The rare seriousness on her face was all gone now. Anyway, it is a unique phenomenon in the universe. You can call it whatever you like, but let's call it the plane of dreams at the moment. It can be altered again if I got a better idea later. Hao Ren had gradually got used to this strange all-over-the-place woman. He held back the urge to tease her and asked, what the heck is the plane of dreams? Is it a parallel universe? I know that theory. Nope, it's a little more complicated than that. Raven 12345 shook her head and continued explaining, the plane of dreams is a special information structure in the universe. It's a little similar to the parallel space, however, the plane of dreams is more illusory and unstable. It overlays the universe. The latter is realistic, stable, and regular while the plane of dreams is illusory, changeable and irregular. When the actual world operates normally according to the regulations of the universe, the plane of dreams, however, was just like a dream which changes constantly along with the real world. However, their reflection of each other is very confusing. Therefore, its variation is basically untraceable. Okay, don't mind the theory. Most people can't understand it. Anyway, you just need to know that the plane of dreams is a space overlaid on top of the real world. It is very unstable but almost never intersects with the real world. There are also mountains, rivers, plants, trees, and animals in the plane of dreams, probably even intelligent life forms. However, all of these are very intricate. Therefore, before you have enough experience, you'd better not wander into that realm. Who would like to go near that kind of place? Hao Ren made a wry smile and continued, I could be attacked by a big group of wolves which size is twice of those from Earth if I ever wander into that kind of place. Didn't you say that the plane of dreams will not intersect with our world? What then happened to me back then? As I had mentioned before, those who are uniquely gifted will be able to get into that space, said Raven 12345 and pointed at Hao Ren's head, via a dream. The world and all that is in it is made up of information, be it hot, cold, big, or small. All these information put themselves together to make things perceivable and describable. This is how everything on Earth comes into being. This is the simplest explanation of the theory of information unification system. Oh, this theory is actually more complicated than the plane of dreams. So, I think that's quite enough for you. You just have to understand, due to the information unification system, anything inside the plane of dreams can be led into the real world, and the medium is via a dream. That is also why I named it the plane of dreams recently. In human history, most of those who are able to connect to the plane of dreams died young. They would be accidentally killed by the malformed illusory creatures from the plane of dreams. However, their short lives also bring endless troubles to the world. Take for instance, the plague, flood etc. It's very troublesome indeed as those who died in the plane of dreams will more often than not cause those creatures, which are mostly harmful, to intrude this world. Hao Ren was sweating. He had never thought of the existence of another strange world occupying space with the world he is so familiar with. He still remember a few days back when he was grumbling about this boring world and how his life was uninteresting. And now, he can no longer hold on to his former perspective of this world anymore as things had just took an exciting turn. So does this imply that I'm gifted? Asked Hao Ren, unknowingly pointing at his nose as he wasn't sure how to respond. You make the plane of dreams sounds crazy and unbelievable. It seems like people can get killed easily in that realm. You have to do something about it. Gifted? No, you aren't, said Raven 12345 with a grin. Don't overthink it. You're just an ordinary man, affected by the force of information disturbance after you came into contact with me, and this force can change you gradually, making you different from most people. It will be easier for you to encounter these unusual things, making your task more convenient in the long run. However, you don't have to worry too much. Those unlucky ones who died in the plane of dreams were those who didn't have strong backups. So far, based on records, none of them were our employees. Without our backup, how long would they last in there? But you're different. You have credentials from us. You being there in the plane of dreams is what we called a crossover by order. I'll do my best to drag you out of that realm every time you're in mortal danger. Sweat was dripping from Hao Ren's forehead as he was left speechless. Now you comprehend the situation in the plane of dreams. However, I do wonder how much you really grasped by just my rough explanation. You definitely need frequent contacts with those abstract beings in order to understand this realm better. You'll have all the opportunity to learn more about that place in due time. Raven 12345 jumped down from her desk and patted Hao Ren's shoulder comfortingly, but it almost threw him off the sofa. Talking about those nightmare, you have stopped having them, right? It means the balance between you and the plane of dreams has been restored. A person in the real world doesn't simply slip into nightmares under usual circumstances, said Raven. Hao Ren gritted his teeth while rubbing his shoulder. Suddenly, he remembered the question he wanted to ask earlier. By the way, you know something about the demon hunter, right? Hao Ren had learned from Vivian about the ageless conflict between demon hunters and the minority, as well as the history of what went down between the minority and humans. He came to know about humans, weak but numerous, the minority few but strong, and the demon hunters whose origins were unclear and whose ground was somewhere in between humans and the minority. All three used to play equally active roles in the civilization of the world. However, the humans have now taken control of this planet while the minority was being marginalized to the extent where nobody remembers them anymore. At the same time, the demon hunters are also lying low among men. Compared to the ages of blood wars in times past between the three races, the age of human civilization was definitely more calm and peaceful. However, Hao Ren knew it was just calm superficially. It's the demon hunters and the minority who had tactfully maintained the peace in the world. The demon hunters, strong human-like warriors, were still roaming the world, hunting the minority to this day. And unfortunately for Hao Ren, there are two treeks among those freaks living under his roof. He was eager to know Raven 12345, the self-proclaimed goddess's take on this matter. More accurately, he wanted to find out whether the three races were treated differently by the Xiling Celestials and the Space Administration, and if they take any sides. Thoughts were racing in Hao Ren's mind. However, Raven 12345 just waved her hand indifferently and said, "I knew it, but I'm just too lazy to care. After all, they have yet to find you. We'll talk about it when they do get on your trail." Hao Ren knew that he was no match for the white-hair succubus in front of him. Therefore, he sat back in his sofa quietly, arms folded across his chest, and asked sincerely, "One last question. I'm just a fragile human being, and yet you let me deal with these creatures. Now, Vivian and Lily's temper was still manageable. What if I come across those who are really bad-tempered? You should ensure that I am capable of protecting myself, right? How about transferring 200 years' worth of power to me?" Hao Ren was just simply making a remark. Beyond his expectation, Raven 12345 actually nodded without hesitation and handed to him the Buddha palm technique. Suddenly, Raven 12345 slapped her forehead and exclaimed, "Gosh! I almost forgot, the intensification of new employee. I was wondering what's missing. Luckily for you, I remembered this before dispatching you onto the battlefield." Hao Ren was speechless. If one day he meets his death, this brain-sick crazy superior would be the one to blame. Hao Ren wondered if Raven 12345 was the only freak in the space administration of the Xiling Empire. He couldn't believe that such a super-civilization was made up of such unreliable fellows anyway. Unfortunately, he had yet to get a chance to meet the other members of the space administration and the senior executives from the Xiling Empire. Raven 12345 did mention earlier that the administrative level of this deserted place was not high enough. However, it is not impossible that they could have visitors from the space administration. Despite that, Hao Ren no longer suspects the identity of Raven 12345 and the existence of the Xiling Empire. This otherworldly mansion, the state-of-the-art, extravagant and elegant facilities in it were definitely not created by humans. To confirm that, the room they were in at that moment was called the New Employee Bioenhancement Center, which looked as if it was ripped right out of a science fiction. Raven walked Hao Ren around the mansion. Along the way they walked past many strange rooms full of crystals and bizarre devices. Hao Ren was awestruck by everything he saw along the way that his jaw literally dropped. Just as he was wondering if there is an end to this mansion, Raven led him into a hall which just looked quite out of place. It was very modern and advanced, even compared to the rest of the building. The hall was a perfect hexagon. Each of its walls was plated with chrome and glossed over with silver. Streams of light in hues of blue and white was pulsing slowly on the walls, like blood vessels. The hall had a high ceiling and was ornamented with numerous crystals floating and shimmering in the air, saturating the hall in baby blue. Along those walls, Hao Ren noticed that there were lots of peculiar devices unknown to him. He thought they looked like some kind of operating board, but there was no button or operating lever on them. There were holograms floating above each of those operating boards. The only discernible and probable control unit was a hexagonal crystal board which was vastly different from any of the machinery on Earth. "This is a bioenhancement center, the smaller version," Raven 12345 pointed proudly at the devices in the hall. "In the earlier days, agents have to stay in the capital of the Empire and undergo the unified bioenhancement and assessment in the City of Shadows. During that time, the space administration was relatively small and nothing much was happening in the macro world, so it's easier to govern. But now that is no longer viable. Therefore, all assessments, elementary training as well as intensification of new agents were transferred to nodes and even to the basic worlds. This place is relatively remote and recently we took a few leaps to connect with the void node. So I simply applied for a facility like this in my dwelling. At first, I thought of applying for a magical facility as I'm really confused by those technologically advanced devices. However, I made a mistake in the application. Hao Ren's head was spinning while listening to Raven 12345. She had this problem where she would just keep on talking regardless of whether her audience could or could not understand her. Hao Ren had zero knowledge of the space administration. How then could he understand what the white-haired succubus had been babbling on about? What the heck is the bioenhancement thingy you mentioned? Hao Ren had managed to keep his sanity even after all the information bombardment. The atmosphere of this place reminded him of some scientific research centers conducting non-stop experiments and dissections. In his mind, the Xiling Empire was still the aliens. He had been an atheist for more than 20 years after all. To him, the idea of gods was far harder to grasp than that of aliens. Let's think about it, a human falling into the hands of aliens to undergo bioenhancement. If this had been in the hands of the Hollywood directors, it would be a waste if it wasn't all bloody and gory. In fiction, those who got very excited and overjoyed when the aliens were about to enhance them were definitely not as deliberative as Hao Ren. Well, one might say that Hao Ren was actually terrified. Don't worry. It's just a simple physical readjustment. It will not be uncomfortable or do you harm. Raven 12345 pushed Hao Ren to the center of the hall while explaining, every day there are hundreds of new agents receiving bioenhancement and we've never had one accident, so don't worry. We always follow the humanized standards. Stand still. I'm going to bring the bioenhancement and reconfiguration chamber up. Hao Ren stood there, trembling. Raven proceeded to hit the invisible buttons, the floor shook slightly and the chamber rose slowly from the rectangular hole on the floor. The silvery white metal pod was rectangular in shape, approximately 2 meters long, with one end bigger than the other. It was very exquisite, covered by a lid embellished with a crystal cross. The lid of the metal pod slid open slowly. Hao Ren was confused and asked, "Why do I feel like I've seen it somewhere else?" Raven 12345 was shocked as said, "How could it be? This is the latest model of the Universal Bioenhancement and Reconfiguration Chamber. I unboxed it just 2 days ago. Where have you seen it before?" After thinking for a while, Hao Ren slapped his head, exclaiming, "Now I remember. It's King Coffin." Raven 12345 slapped Hao Ren's shoulder, "Don't you remember the employee code of conduct? Never cuss in front of your superior. If you had to do it after your superior has finished her words." Hao Ren tilted his shoulder and stepped backward quickly. "You want me to get in there? I have to tell you that I am a man of principle. Just the shape of this thing is enough to scare the hell out of me. Hey! Don't be pushing me. I will never get in. It is still a coffin even if you plate it with silver. There's even a cross on it." Raven 12345 lifted Hao Ren single-handedly and threw him into the coffin. "Be a man and just get in." Hao Ren was helplessly unable to fight against the crazy white-hair succubi. After being spun around for a moment he found himself lying inside the box. At that moment, a layer of transparent protective screen extended from the 4 sides of the metal pod, completely trapping him inside. Hao Ren could only give in. However, nothing happened after a while. He turned his head to the side and found Raven 12345 holding up a data terminal, looking enthralled. He hit the 2 sides of the pod and shouted, "Then, what's next?" "Don't shout. I'm looking for the user manual. Why the heck is this so complicated?" "Where's the switch?" said Raven 12345 without looking up. At that Hao Ren shouted, "FXXX. I resign. I break the contract. I quit. You can't be trusted at all." "Oh. Found it." Raven 12345 then slapped on something on one of the sides of the coffin, and Hao Ren's drastic protest stopped at once. The last thing he saw was a dazzling white light penetrating into his retina. Darkness, frost, silence, and endless chaos. It was as if time had lost its meaning. At that moment, it felt like his soul had left his body, floating in an intangible and indescribable dimension. He tried his best to retrieve any bits of the five familiar senses, but to no avail. There was no sound, no light, no heat, and no touch. The spirit of man, confined in a small bottle, floating alone. After about 10 seconds, Hao Ren heard a loud noise. Bang. The next thing he knew was somebody grabbing him by his arms and pulling him up, and he gradually regained his sight. Rays of light within his sight came together and consolidated into a figure. It's Raven 12345's beautiful cheeks and her signature silver hair. She patted Hao Ren on the shoulder and seemed satisfied. Okay. It's done. Hao Ren sprang up and realized that he was still standing in the coffin-shaped metal pod. Had he not kept his footing, he might just tumble out of it. He balanced his body and jumped out of the pod carefully. So, that's it. Why do I feel like it had only been a short while? Yes, 12 seconds, said Raven 12345 while waving the data terminal in her hand. Exactly the same as what's written on the manual. Just press the switch, choose an automated mode and wait for about 12 seconds. Wait for the sound ding, the red light to come on, and the chamber lid will then open automatically, expelling the subject out of the pod. But you yourself jumped out of the chamber. Is that a microwave oven? Raven 12345 shrugged her shoulders and replied, anyway, the methods of operation of all devices are more or less the same. Isn't that the standard of procedure for most of the automated devices? Hao Ren was stunned by her calmness. His only comfort was that at least nothing unfortunate had happened and all parts of his body were still intact. He then clenched his fist to see if the alien bioenhancement technology really worked. He wondered if he was on the same path as those masters in those stories. He was so surprised to discover that, to be revealed in the upcoming chapter. I don't feel any changes. Hao Ren doubted as he pinched his upper arm. It did not become brawnier or resistant to pain. He could not summon the magic thunderball too, he felt he was still immortal. What about the ability of enhanced regeneration? As much as he wanted that, he could never build up the courage to slash himself. What more do you want? Raven 12345 flipped through the operating manual for instructions to recalibrate the bioenhancement and reconfiguration chamber. At the same time, she asked, how about the magical ability to conjure up 3 fireballs? I thought you meant combat strength. Hao Ren felt he was being shortchanged. You assigned a bunch of monsters to me. Don't you think it's absolutely necessary to give me some equivalent ability to match? What have you done to me exactly? I administered some hormonal treatment to remove the scars on your elbow while I treated your white hair, said Raven 12345 with a straight face. At least, for now. Hao Ren was speechless. You look hilarious. Raven 12345 could not hold her laughter anymore seeing Hao Ren mugging. Don't think too much, dude. I know what you're thinking. I have had more recruits than I can remember. They unequivocally had the same thing on their mind, instant, superhuman gratification. Guess what would happen if you were given the ability to perform 20-meter vertical jumps overnight? Hao Ren was unsure. No more freaking out when the elevator breaks down. Become Spider-Man's double. Raven 12345 stared at him, unblinking. You remind me of someone. By the way, your answers are a little far-fetched. If you suddenly acquired such an ability, you would instantly crash into walls or shoot through the roof as a result. Bioenhancement is a step-by-step process. She patted him on his shoulder as she continued, you've got what it takes. The ability is only being capped by a mind lock. The mind lock is there to ensure that you never go too fast. For the time being, get your feet wet first and over time you'll adapt to your newfound ability. Hao Ren then realized that he was not exactly shortchanged. The deal just worked in installments. Raven 12345 was right, the safety lock is an absolute necessity considering his mortal body was only configured for the Earth's gravitational environment. He could get himself killed if he was unable to control his newfound ability. He was pretty self-aware though, he was calm and cool for the majority. However, curiosity would overcome him sometimes. It was too tempting not to try out his superhuman ability just to see what it was like. What kind of bioenhancement am I getting? Hao Ren asked expectantly. I suppose asking a question isn't against the rules. At least I get to know what I'm getting into. Raven 1 2 3 4 5 sounded serious: swift muscle reflex, super strength, regeneration, reactive evolution, and resistance to radiation, toxins, extreme temperatures, caustic substances, as well as any other nasty stuff you can think of. But, all these are basically still in the process of being built upon your mortal body. Other aspects of bioenhancement will follow suit once you pass the test, which is extremely stringent. You're not allowed to abuse your abilities, and you need to show that you're in control of yourself. Hao Ren nodded as if he understood. He was pretty confident that he would pass the test, but as Raven 1 2 3 4 5 had mentioned, it all depended on the outcome of the examination. Nevertheless, he was now officially an employee of the Space Administration, albeit one of the lowest rung on the ladder. Protective gear, checked. Bioenhancement, checked. Help yourself to the rest of the employees' codes of conduct. The most important thing of all is, never ever tell anyone about the Space Administration except your tenants. Raven stared straight into Hao Ren's eyes. You may tell them why you're doing this, which is to protect them, but just that, no more. They're chosen, but they're not part of the Space Administration yet. I think you understand the difference, right? Hao Ren looked a little surprised. Talk about confidentiality, huh? Space Administration, God's organization. I do wonder though, doesn't God like to spell it out loud when it comes to his great plans: global worship, evangelical outreach? Publicity is only necessary when the need arises. Raven 1 2 3 4 5 shook her head. In the case of the Space Administration, there's no need for that. Just remember, the administration has its own local civilization where its history follows its natural course. It's totally independent. God wouldn't mess with history. It would spell disaster for the human race if they learn that there are higher beings out there who are controlling their fate and their world. Of course, telling them about the Space Administration isn't going to cause an end-of-the-world scenario. Most people won't even believe it. However, that doesn't mean you're allowed to do so. It's a matter of principle. Hao Ren nodded in response and seemed like he had understood it. Okay. So essentially, the Space Administration is in a way a secret society. We keep people in the dark while we're in it. Not really. The macro world isn't constant in itself. Raven 12345 continued again as she shook her head. It's a massive system built by the Emperor, an ever-expanding virtual web of the Empire, while the Space Administration is sort of its central nervous system. Naturally, we would encounter all kinds of situations. Sometimes, a civilization or a community expands to become large enough, or a major disaster strikes. In such cases, the Space Administration can no longer keep itself a secret. It would then be forced to intervene. When it does, the affected community would then be accepted into the Empire, with prior approval of course. But you don't have to worry about all this, just mind your own business. Anyway, the examining officers are rather lenient nowadays. During the early days of the Space Administration, when the Empire was in turbulence, the rule of confidentiality was enforced heavy-handedly. Anyone in the civil departments who defied the rule would be executed under the martial law. Capital punishment still exists today, but as long as you stay in line you'll be fine. Hao Ren was in cold sweat as he had only begun to comprehend how serious the monstrous organization was. Yet at the same time, there seemed to be a silver lining. Despite only having a vague understanding of the Web and Space Administration, he was part of the system now. However, he wondered, was the Earth, the solar system, or the entire of space just a speck in the macro world? The more he pondered, the more motivated he was. By then, the room was cleaned and tidied up. Raven 1 2 3 4 5 led him outside. Stop thinking too much. We're done with the orientation. Now, I have a mission for you. Hao Ren was excited that the organization needed his service. In 2 days, you'll be going to Europe, Raven 1 2 3 4 5 remarked. Your mission is to bring a tenant back. I've spent considerable effort to bring him in, but that dumbass disembarked to a place with an entire 8-hour time difference instead. It's time to show your worth. Mission. Europe. Hao Ren stared at Raven 1 2 3 4 5, blinking. I didn't know that there's a foreigner in my list of tenants. Raven 1 2 3 4 5 looked at him up and down in derision. You don't learn, do you? We're talking about the other kind here. What do you think the nationality of that vampire girl is, huh? As the penny dropped, Hao Ren felt embarrassed at his own ignorance. His thinking had become so rigid as he had been living his entire life in the human world. Target. Rendezvous. Time. And most important of all, on whose dime? Oh come on, get over it. Raven squinted at him. Of course it'll be on the administration's dime. We do have a teleportation machine laying around, but you'll gain more field experience by doing things the traditional way. So, you're gonna take the plane. As for your tenant, frankly, I don't know how it'll look like since it must have disguised itself as somebody else. But rest assured, it will find you once you're there, as it'll be able to pick up your MDT signal. And I've got you a passport, made to order. Do remember to pick it up while you're on your way out. Hao Ren nodded in acknowledgement. What about the two ladies at my house? They fight like cats and dogs every other day. I don't think it's a good idea to just leave the two of them at my place. It was hard to tell what would transpire, as Vivian and Lily had been locking horns with each other all the while. He broke out in cold sweat just by imagining the collateral damage they would cause. So, he wanted it resolved at the soonest possible time, lest his house be wrecked in no time. Bring them along, they may be of help. I'll get them documentations. Raven 12345 waved as she continued. After all, the vampire is well traveled. She'll make a good guide and a bodyguard. No worries. They're going to join the party, I bet my last penny on it. At the end of the day, they've been redundant for quite some time. So, take the trip as an opportunity to smooth out the rough edges. The words of help and smooth out the rough edges unnerved Hao Ren. He smelled trouble ahead but could not tell what it was exactly. He also did not bother to ask. He had known from experience that Raven 12345 would not want to talk about anything beyond the present. Now, move your ass. Raven 12345 patted him on his back. Check your bank card, the money is in. I'll send the details of the rendezvous point to your MDT. It's just a simple mission every rookie does. So, have fun. Before Hao Ren could say anything, the world started spinning around him. He soon woke up on the road in bastard barrio with time on his shoulders and a bag in his hand. He knew it wasn't a dream, but after every trip to the mansion, he would have this unexplainable, surreal feeling. He figured that it may have been caused by the crazy teleportation experience. Hao Ren had no clue how Raven 12345 knew his bank card number. He was also flabbergasted at how unsophisticated the way things worked in the Space Administration. It was nothing like the description in the novels he had read. Oh dear, I forgot that I had to ask Raven about the vampire's failed blood magic. He remembered Vivian's attempt to fix his nightmare condition. Neither magic nor vampire's blood worked. He could not make sense of it. The question had been hanging over his head for quite some time, but he forgot about it when he was meeting Raven 12345. He looked up at the bright, blue sky as though he could see that Raven was busy in the mansion. He shook his head and left the scene, leaving the question for another time. As he got back to Whitestone Road in the southern suburbs, he breathed a sigh of relief upon seeing that his old house was still standing. No smoke billowed out and no explosion was heard. The two girls may have reached a truce while he was away, or it was just because Lily had been out. As Hao Ren took out his key and reached for the door, he exclaimed, "I'm back." There was no response from the inside. So, he went in and closed the door. The air conditioning was off, the house was as quiet as a grave. He sneaked around for a while only to find Raleigh trailing out of the kitchen, greeting him. Oh shucks! Could they be fighting outside? Though he was not a pessimist, he could not ignore the probable, inconvenient reality that he would have to get accustomed to the scene of the Tibetan Mastiff versus Siberian Wolf conflict, and that the worst would happen when he was away. The heat of the midday sun was so bad that it seared his skin while he walked home from the bus stop. He picked up the remote controller, wanting to switch the air conditioner on. However, it did not respond to the command. There was no power in the house. An unexplained feeling of unease started to bother him. What's going on? Ever since I received my first assignment, everything seems to have gone haywire. He became superstitious. But then, he heard two familiar voices. Vivian and Lily were at the door. They were back. It seemed like they were not in a fight. Wow, landlord, you're back. Lily was the first to burst in, looking surprised. It's midday. Why don't we have lunch together? Her brain seemed to comprise of food and food only. "Where have you been?" he asked Vivian as he wiped away the sweat on his forehead. He did not even bother to talk to Lily, who had obviously become unresponsive to anything other than food. "I thought you guys had a fight. The power went dead, so I thought it was time to pay the bill." Vivian smiled and jeered. "Then I found this big dog out there, so I brought her along." Lily did not respond to her mockery at all. "Two people to run a simple errand?" He looked curiously at Vivian, but he quickly realized her condition. "Oh, I almost forgot, you can't touch money." Vivian's expression hardened because it touched her sore spot, but she shrugged it off as though she did not mind it. "The transformer at the substation is down. It's going to take another half a day before the thing can get back to normal again." "Okay," Hao Ren responded briefly as he waved a magazine back and forth rigorously to cool himself. "The weather is freaking hot and the power outage is not helping either." "Lily, are you okay?" He saw Lily squatting on the sofa with her tongue sticking out, panting. "I ran a little too hard on the way back." Vivian and Hao Ren looked at her, bewildered. It was not at all an exaggeration to say that Lily was a big dog when she was panting like one. Although Lily had her own quirks and cuteness, they were not things Hao Ren could stomach. "Is it really necessary to stick your tongue out while you squat?" Lily wiped her sweat away as she looked up. Her mind went blank before she became aware of her immodesty. "Excuse me, old habits die hard." She chuckled. Hao Ren gave her a wry smile. He did not know what ought to be said. During that awkward moment, a chill suddenly filled the air. He turned around and was surprised to see that Vivian had transformed. She was emanating a layer of red fog much like a blood mist. She was waving two foldable hand fans back and forth in quick motion, sending the chill to every corner of the house. "Mr. Landlord, what do you think?" Hao Ren was astonished. "I swear I've never seen anything like this." Lily had moved closer to enjoy the cool air, but at the same time, she did not want to waste the opportunity to mock Vivian. "Hey, you, whingy thing. Isn't the chill you release supposed to be smelly as well?" Vivian raised her eyebrow. "In case you haven't already known, the scent is only reserved for combat use. I'd like to keep it fresh whenever I need some chill air." It was an eye-opener. Hao Ren cracked up and joked, "Now, that's proper usage of vampire magic. From now on, we can save on the monthly bill." And then, something came to his mind. "By the way, I'll be going on a mission trip to Europe in 2 days. Would you two like to join me?" "I'm going on a mission to Europe." Hao Ren tried to impress by imagining himself in a black suit and a pair of sunglasses. Additionally, he spoke in a low voice. He wanted to project himself as a glamorous agent. "Nice, I'm in." Lily agreed excitedly, just as Raven had predicted. However, Vivian's thought process was a little lagging. "Paying rental with my cool air, good idea." Her strayed mind annoyed Hao Ren. "Can you emanate warm air too?" Lily gave a sideways look as she tried to stump Vivian. It'd be more than enough to pay a whole month's rental. Being ectotherms, the Blood Clan has no difficulty emanating chill, but when it comes to warm air. Ahem. We're talking about a more serious topic here. Hao Ren was even more annoyed as their conversation went off course. "Lily's in. How about you, Vivian? Please join us if you can make it. After all, Europe is an unfamiliar territory." Hao Ren was being honest. Apart from the southern suburbs, Third Ring Road was the farthest place he had ever gone. He was now being offered the opportunity to go to places he had never thought of before. Moreover, everything was being paid for by the administration. To say that he was excited was an understatement. At least it's a public service, albeit a foreign one. Hao Ren thought. "Me. I'm okay." Vivian lowered her head and awkwardly said, "I just lost my job a couple of days ago. I'm officially jobless now. Hey, why don't I work as your tour guide and offset half a month as rental in return?" So much for being a vampire and nobility of the night. Vivian had just thrown her status and pride out of the window. "Let's not bother with the rent." Hao Ren looked up to the sky and let out a long, long sigh. "I already have an agreement with Raven 1 2 3 4 5 and all of you are gonna stay here with me. Anyway, I don't mind if you help me out with some of the house chores." Didn't you work in McDonald's and a few other places a while back? I heard that they've all gone bankrupt thanks to you. Ahem, I've got nothing to do with that. Vivian exclaimed. Lily was still immersed in the excitement of going abroad. Landlord, when do we depart? Where to? For how long? Is there a time frame? Can I pack my luggage now? When are we going to have our lunch? Hao Ren raised his hand and warded Lily off. Let's just slow down. I haven't even booked our flight yet. Besides, I'm still waiting for the mission details from Raven 12345. Oh yeah, I have something fun for all of you to see. It's kind of high-tech. It's Space Administration standard equipment. Darn, where did I keep it? He tucked his hands inside his pockets searching frantically. He remembered he had the awesome MDT in his pants pocket, but he only found a few loose threads hanging in it. He was sweating like a pig. I'm dead, man. Hao Ren could not bear to think of the consequences if the gadget fell into the wrong hands. He ran through many scenarios in his mind, and there was nothing more terrifying than certain death should Raven 12345 find out he was negligent as an agent. Just when he was about to rush out to search for the misplaced device, a buzzing sound was heard right next to him. A swirling hole opened up mid-air and he saw the hexagonal MDT emerge from it. As he reached out, the device dropped right into his hand while a holographic message was displayed. The message warned, "Dear user, please refrain from leaving your device in the car as the device has limited capabilities in finding its owner. You shall not misuse its functions. If you do, the device will automatically alert your superior accordingly." Hao Ren was astonished at what he saw. There had not been a computer that could talk back until then. He started to get what Raven 12345 meant by no less intelligent than you. It was an MDT with AI, artificial intelligence. Lily's eyes gleamed with curiosity as the little gadget attracted her interest. She rushed over. Landlord, can I have a look at that thingy? Hao Ren was careful not to break the rules in the employee handbook. He made sure it was okay before passing the device to Lily, saying, "Be careful." Although the device is solidly built according to Raven 12345, there's no way to fix it once it's broken. Lily took the MDT from Hao Ren. She played with it for some time, but it seemed like it was not responding until a holographic message popped up, "Right of access required. Please save yourself the trouble from trying again." They were lost for words at how cheeky the AI was. Unlike Lily, Vivian had more control over her own curiosity. She smiled at Lily mockingly before prancing into the kitchen. "Have fun, big dog. I'm cooking." Lily shoved the MDT back to Hao Ren before following Vivian into the kitchen. "Wait. I'm going with you. Do you even cook at all? I thought all you know is eating. I need an air conditioner." Left alone, Hao Ren took the opportunity to familiarize himself with the MDT. He also wanted to know what the Space Administration was all about, but the more he read the handbook the more terrified he was. The beginning chapters of the employee handbook were about standard protocols. However, the chapters towards the end of the handbook were bizarre. The observations and guiding process of the Turk III civilization. The registration methods for the end of the Sixth New World. A guide to the reporting process of regional war containment. The intervention of examining officers in planetary wars. The basics of extermination law and the roles of an examining officer in related processes. Hao Ren thought he could possibly find out more from the AI MDT, which was capable of interacting with humans. He started to inquire in his mind, what do all these mean? Literally, the MDT emanated a holographic reply. These are for examining officers only, they do not concern you for now. Examining officers are regional agents of the Empire. They are akin to living saints or living sons in religion. Are you having problems with your work? Hao Ren quickly denied it. He needed some time to clear his mind. Late in the afternoon, he received the details of his mission from Raven 12345. He set aside the weird handbook and focused on the upcoming important trip. The destination was England, but the location was in a little-known, remote countryside where his new tenant would be waiting for him. The 5-digit, white-haired succubus may have looked a tad bit unreliable. However, she never went back on her promises. Hao Ren was teary-eyed when he saw the amount of money in his bank account. It was just too awesome, it contained a string of zeros. He signed the contract without as much as a second thought. Hao Ren realized that from then on, he would be leaving behind his idyllic, carefree life and things would have to be seen from the roost of the Space Administration. For the monstrous organization, human currency was very much just part of the tools of the trade and seemed to come in unlimited numbers. A part of him wanted to have Raven 12345 wire another $1 million into his account, but his better judgment decided against it. That said, he did not have to worry about his living expenses for the time being. Vivian's freeloading expenses were also covered for a year or two at the very least. Ever since the hopeless vampire moved in, she freeloaded off Hao Ren's expenses. While he did mention the prospect of her being a live-in maid to offset the rental, it was more of a joke than anything. Hao Ren was a common man, he obviously could not afford such a life. It was pretty much an excuse to put Vivian at ease with her freeloading. Well, that was no longer a problem too. The witch gave him enough money for 3 to go around the world, just to pick someone up from England. During the ride to the international airport, Vivian constantly bugged Hao Ren. "Hey, is that Space Administration thing still hiring? I could go there to operate the air conditioning." She was still going on about it when they got on the plane. Hao Ren got a bit irritated and went, "Forget about it. This requires talent, you know. I'm at the very least a reserve civil servant and a backup successor. You think it's that easy? Aside from that, the witch's place is pretty much fluid all the time. She's a goddess, air conditioning is probably the least of her concerns." Vivian fussed with the air conditioning at home to save cost, and all of them saw her as no different than the air conditioner's remote. The vampire pouted and faced towards the window. She curiously stared at the ground staff running about their duties. "Is Raleigh going to be fine? Don't worry about him. He's much more capable than you think." Hao Ren was not worried about that devil of a cat at all. Obviously, one could not bring a cat into the aircraft, and international shipping was not a realistic option. Thus, Hao Ren just left him at home and asked for the help of his neighbor to look after him. Hao Ren was pretty sure that by day 2, Raleigh would slip out of the house to do whatever it wanted. Raleigh does have a glorious history behind him. He was the dominant alpha of the street with just a few pounds of meat on him a few years back. His survival instincts are much better than mine. When I took him in 2 years ago, I was dead worried when I had to leave the house. After a while though, I realized it was really for nothing. Once, I was away for a month and he came back half a kilo heavier. Hao Ren, what is England like? I've never been there before. Lily was seated right opposite of Hao Ren. As she stared outside curiously, Hao Ren saw that she was seated like a cat, on all fours. With the allowance that he had received, Hao Ren went ahead and booked them on first class. And boy, it was very spacious. The distance between the seats were pretty wide as well. Hyperactive Lily was already squirming about before the flight took off. Granted, while traveling in style was partly due to the generous allowance, Hao Ren wanted the privacy more than anything. With 2 supernaturals in tow, he did not want to take any chances lest their identities be revealed to other passengers. It also made talking about sensitive topics a little easier. How would I know? Never been there myself. Hao Ren shrugged and looked at Vivian. Right, just to reconfirm, you're sure you've been to England before? You'll be our guide over there now since you said you could speak English. Of course, who do you think I am? A mere charlatan. Vivian sneered. I've already been around the world before, knew the earth was round when you humans were still chomping on raw game. In fact, I've been to the Vatican. Hao Ren quickly feigned a cough. Ahem, let's leave what you did at the monastery aside. Who knows what your kind would think of that? Them. Haven't seen them in centuries. Most of them are stubborn idiots. The few smarter ones are even better at hiding than me. Vivian shrugged. Our kind are very individualistic. Even during our golden years, unity was fragile at best. How else did you think we ended up in such a fringed position during the present? Ah, forget about it. It's depressing talk. How did I ended up like this? Hao Ren grinned. Oh, so you do realize how silly you are. That's that. Well, as long as you can speak English and guide us around, it'll be fine. Saves us the trouble of getting a guide. Our job can't involve anyone else. Raven even said that as part of the training, she's not even giving me a map. Vivian patted her chest. Don't worry, even Arthur Mordred could not best me in an argument. I lived in England for a good 130 years, you know. English is like my mother tongue. Hao Ren raised his eyebrows in suspicion. It felt like Vivian was gloating more than anything, but he decided to pay it no heed. After a while, Hao Ren noticed that Lily was still squirming in her seat and sought to distract her with a question. Oh yeah, I have been wanting to ask you this. How do you get your identities in the human world? Especially you, Lily. How do you do it? This question actually did plague Hao Ren for a while. Vivian did look and played the part of a human. Lily the idiot was another matter altogether. She said she was around during the time of the Republic and registered herself as a famous artist. God knows how many identity cards she had changed throughout the years. It was very surprising to see Lily blending in with the humans so nonchalantly. Lily finally settled down, squatting on her seat. She shook her head as if a pair of ears were there. Wasn't that hard, you know? I saw how human civilization was built. So, living as a human was not difficult at all. At that point, Lily suddenly perked up. Her slowpoke of a brain finally had a spark of brilliance. And what do you mean, especially me? You taking me for an idiot? Hao Ren quickly shook his head in denial while Vivian turned away to ignore the commotion. Lily pointed her finger at them. I know that you two think I'm dumb. I'm pretty quick with my senses, you know. Just can't be bothered to get serious with you guys. I'm telling you, Hao Ren, don't think just because I look dumb most of the time. I'm very capable, you know. I know a lot of people, most of them are dead now. It is what it is, but I'm capable, okay. Hao Ren wiped his cold sweat off. His instincts told him that Lily was just about to parade a list of historical greats before him. Thank goodness she kept it short. Ever since the two supernaturals came into his life, Hao Ren was constantly surprised at how they spoke of historical figures like they were close friends, much to his disbelief. With the pre-flight preparations completed, the lead stewardess made an announcement for the passengers to push up their seats and buckle up. Lily finally stopped squirming and sat down quietly as she put on her seat belts deftly. Then, Lily and Hao Ren saw something that stunned the both of them. Vivian was struggling with the seat belt. The vampire may have looked the part of a high-class aristocrat, but when the flight takeoff announcement was made, Vivian was fumbling about with the seat belt. Hao Ren helped her to buckle up but could not help taking a piss at her. You're afraid of airplanes. You can grow wings to fly, right? I've never sat on one of these before. Vivian said meekly. Hao Ren's eyes widened. This vampire, who was around during the construction of the pyramids and other great wonders, whose knowledge of the world was akin to verbal diarrhea, never actually sat on a plane before. Vivian looked like she was about to cry. I couldn't afford the tickets. Hao Ren had nothing to retort. As their flight took off, Vivian and Lily pretty much swapped personalities. Normally, Lily was the lively one at home. She was always up and about, so driven by curiosity that she would stare at something for hours on end to learn about it. Chances are that she might just chew on pebbles to test their hardness if no one was around. Vivian, on the other hand, was the mature, collected one. Though she was stricken by a streak of misfortune, she still maintained a certain dignity characteristic of the vampire nobles. At least in comparison to Lily. But now, the roles seemed to be reversed. Lily was lounging about waiting for meal services while looking up the in-flight entertainment for something interesting. Vivian, however, was having a ball. She was looking out the window in excitement, gaping as she saw the clouds passing her by. Wow, it really does fly, and at such heights. Vivian exclaimed. It was Hao Ren's first time flying as well, and he could understand Vivian's excitement to a certain extent, but he couldn't help but wonder aloud, I thought you could fly. What's the surprise? It's so different compared to when I'm flying myself, Vivian sneered. Also, I don't usually fly this high, too easy a target for stray thunderbolts. Besides, at such high altitude, the cold is no joke. There was once when I wanted to see the stars and flew a wee bit too high, I literally fell from the sky as a block of ice and almost got caught by the demon hunters. Rarely fly that high ever since. Hao Ren raised his eyebrows. Then, you were flying low when you were traveling around the world last time. Weren't you afraid of getting shot down by bows and whatnots? When I was traveling the world. I flew and walked since I'm much stronger than humans, and time was not an issue. It wouldn't be a problem for me to walk from Europe to Asia and back again. Vivian said with a giggle. Though at times I would still fly high, especially when hiding from those pesky hunters. They can't do much when I'm that high up. Speaking of bows, those are child's play, nothing to be afraid of. Even those Welsh longbowmen can't reach me. How far do you think arrows can fly anyway? That said, I did get shot down by an anti-aircraft gun once during World War II. Hao Ren gawked at the revelation. Vivian sheepishly said, "You humans are sure good at building this sort of murderous contraptions. Not too long ago your lots were fighting each other with rocks and sticks and were praying to gods to cure headaches. Didn't took you guys long to be shooting tons of steel up into the air. At that time I thought it was a new fancy catapult and almost took a shell right in the face. Luckily I managed to disperse with my bat form, otherwise I'd probably be the vampire who died the most hilarious death." The experience of flying in a plane might have gotten the penniless Vivian a tad bit more excited than usual that she was revealing her embarrassing past one after another. At first, he was rather engaged by the conversation, but halfway through, he was gawking at Vivian's tales. Some of it was so outlandish that Hao Ren wasn't sure how to react. When Vivian came to the part where some old chap she knew in North America got killed by a meteorite, Hao Ren decided it was time to change topic and turned to Lily. "You seem like a seasoned flyer." Lily looked up lazily and grinned. "I had only been on those early Stinson models." Hao Ren looked puzzled. "What are those?" Vivian was readjusting herself on her seat when she heard, "That was during the era of the Republic." "How rich were you back then?" "Those days I couldn't afford air tickets as well." Lily waved her hand, "But I would sneak into aircrafts, hiding in the cargo hold, or just hanging outside the aircraft. Back then, security systems weren't as advanced as they are now, and there were lots of places that were not checked. With my agility, avoiding a normal human's sight is very easy. The only difficulty was landing. I did try jumping off once, it wasn't fatal but it was pretty scary." Hao Ren immediately retorted, "Nonsense, most people would be dead trying to pull that stunt of yours." Lily stuck her tongue out in defiance. "Well, at least I learned and adapted from experience. That's why I said that bat is too stiff. Plus, she is not as smart as me at times. She just don't know how to properly utilize her body." Vivian shrugged. "I don't think hanging outside an airplane to avoid paying fare is something to be proud of." That said, Vivian couldn't help but to talk more about it with Lily. Their chatter mainly revolved around how one could safely hang oneself outside human transportations. Lily was going on about how one could hide in a cargo hold while Vivian gave pointers on how to dodge anti-aircraft missiles. It was pretty much hogwash to Hao Ren, but at least this talk gave these two who are always at loggerheads a common ground. They share interest in pulling off outlandish stunts. Looking at Lily's cheerful face, Hao Ren was sure that this werewolf is much more competent than she looks. Being able to hang outside an aircraft halfway across China wasn't very surprising for a werewolf. What was impressive was her resourcefulness despite her usual derpiness. He could only imagine her untold tales and escapades, but immediately decided against it. After that, it was a quiet 11 hours flight for the trio. Before long, they landed at their destination, Heathrow Airport. As they stepped out of the plane, Hao Ren had to drag along Lily, who was half asleep while Vivian walked out looking fresh. He took the opportunity to breathe in the air deeply and found it no different than that back at home. Vivian looked up. As it was still early dawn, the skies were still dark. There was a veil of mist that shrouded the air, making the sky much darker than it was. Being in a foreign land, beset by cold winds and gloomy skies, it's usually not something tourists look forward to, but this was much to Vivian's taste. "This illuminance is just nice for my skin. The past 2 days was hell. Have you ever seen a vampire sunbathe in broad daylight?" Hao Ren rolled his eyes. "Have you ever seen a vampire out and about hunting for jobs?" Vivian turned away in embarrassment. Trying to change the topic of the conversation, she said, This place looks very different from the England I remember." A very groggy Lily still managed to stab at Vivian. "You couldn't even afford air tickets the last time, what makes you think you remember how the airport even looked like?" Dread befell Hao Ren. Vivian quickly interposed and said, "That's not it, last I remember, this area was supposed to be an empty plot of land, or a rocky beachhead, if my vampiric memories are correct." Something suddenly dawned upon Hao Ren. The tingling unease when they departed earlier came to a head. When was the last time you came to England? Vivian took some time to ponder and slowly lowered her head. I remember then there was this king called Lionheart fighting a war. Hao Ren's jaw fell and he exclaimed, "That's freaking 1190. Well, at least he knew his history well. How then you be so unsure?" He couldn't help but to look at Vivian in astonishment. He never thought that one could be this forgetful, like Lily. "I've lived for so long, can't I have the liberty of remembering something wrongly?" Vivian tried to defend herself defiantly, but then relented. "And you do know that my memory is not that strong." "Now what?" Hao Ren scratched his head. He was not an experienced traveler and was ill-prepared for this trip. Vivian, who was supposed to be his guide and translator, was about as clueless as he is concerning the lay of the land. Not to mention their mission was to locate a client with an unknown name and looks in a small, nameless, and uncharted village. His first mission did not turn out to be the cakewalk he initially thought it would be. "At least I have a better command in English compared to you, right?" Vivian shrugged. Hao Ren had his doubts, but he could say nothing and just nodded. It's a known fact that if a person questionable credibility tells you to leave everything to him or her, you shouldn't expect much of the outcome. It was already a bit too late when Hao Ren learnt this. He was stunned and realized how unprepared he was for this trip when Vivian started speaking in the ancient Anglo-Saxon English. A dizzy landlord, a gullible werewolf who was asleep as if half dead, and a seemingly dependable vampire who turned out to be quite useless, found themselves lost in a foreign land with no means of communication. As they had not thought of the possibility of encountering a language barrier, they didn't care to look up the directions on the web. Had he foreseen this, he would have asked the airport staffs for assistance. The least they could do, even with the language barrier, was point him to the nearest embassy. Unfortunately, this matter had not crossed the minds of this trio. Vivian, with her ancient accent, was trying to communicate with an old local chap. Hao Ren, confused by her accent, could only look on with pity as the old man, a native English speaker, struggled to converse with her as she bombarded him with series of "What? Give him a break, Vivian." Hao Ren gave Vivian a nudge. "The English that you are speaking is a very ancient form of the language. Do you know that it is totally different from the English we converse in these days?" Vivian looked distraught. How could the language change so much? "I was just using the older form of the language. Now, even the pronunciation had changed so drastically." Hao Ren took a long sigh. "When you were born, humans were still living in caves and grunting in their conversations. How silly can you be, seriously?" "I'm not that old, all right." Vivian glared at Hao Ren. "Those people were part of the Jurassic era." Upon seeing them arguing, the aged gentleman stepped in to stop the squabble. He maintained his composure even after all the trouble Vivian put him through, a real gentleman. He grabbed Hao Ren's arm and went. "Chinese? Are you Chinese?" Hao Ren blinked and thanked the heavens that he still remembered some of the English from his school days and quickly nodded. The old gentleman smiled and pointed towards a young lad in uniform. Hao Ren and Vivian instantly understood his intention. Hao Ren and Vivian sheepishly looked at each other and thanked the old gentleman and quickly dragged along Lily, who was still asleep standing, to the service counter. The staff was a good lad dressed in a smart uniform. The moment Vivian got to him, she started going. %UN at %UN #UN at. Hao Ren quickly pushed Vivian aside and smiled at the young man and spoke in Mandarin. "Ah, sorry my man, do you know about?" He stopped halfway through as realized that the young man might not be able to catch what he was saying with his native slang and switched to a more standard form of Mandarin. "Good day, I can't speak English. I need to go somewhere. May I know who can I seek help from?" As he listened to Hao Ren, the boy frowned a little as he tried to construct a sentence in Mandarin in his mind. He then quickly smiled as he reverted back to his professional facade and pointed towards the car park. There are a few Chinese among those taxi drivers. Go ask if they can help you," said the boy as he struggled to pronounce the last few words of the sentence with a weird intonation. Hao Ren happily thanked him and headed quickly for the car park. He never thought that the vampire who could out-argue Arthur Pendragon was pretty much useless when she was needed the most. Her crowning accomplishment was to puzzle a poor old Briton, and in the end it was Hao Ren who had to ask for directions in Mandarin. Life was definitely much more interesting compared to novels, as it is not reasonable at all for most of the time. You can continue sleeping once we get to the hotel, hang in there. Hao Ren said as he tapped Lily on the shoulder. All he heard was a light snore. This dumb werewolf really didn't let her surroundings disrupt her biological clock. The wee hours in London was about the same time as Lily's nap time back at home. She was so sleepy that she couldn't even open her eyes. At that point, she was pretty much following Hao Ren around with her eyes closed while putting her acute sense of smell to good use as she stayed right behind him, much to his surprise. Not before long the trio arrived at the car park looking for the Chinese taxi drivers. While they sure looked the part, most of them were actually British-born Chinese, and spoke only a little Mandarin. They were clueless when they saw the address that Hao Ren wrote in Mandarin. Lucky for him, one of them can converse in Mandarin at a decent level. He was exhausted from all the inconveniences of being in a foreign country. The glee of suckering Raven 12345 into giving him a huge sum of money for the trip had faded by now. He quickly realized that this is one hell of a mission, one that would drain the life out of you. It seems that Raven was dead serious when she said she would put her employee's capability to the test. It won't be surprising if Raven 12345 had actually thought of the part where Hao Ren, after getting that huge sum of money, would lose his head and go traveling without much planning. There was another possibility that Raven 12345 thought it would be a good time for Hao Ren to get used to the two bungling numbskulls by his side. Though they were rather ill-prepared for the trip, Hao Ren still remembered to book a hotel beforehand. As he was given huge sum for this trip, he booked a suite at this rather high-class hotel which, on their homepage, advertised their multilingual staffs who are supposedly proficient in Mandarin, ensuring the quality of service even to Chinese tourists. At this point, Hao Ren no longer gave a toss about the quality of service, he just hoped that the staff could show him to his room without much hassle. After which he would contact Raven 12345 for any pointers for the mission. After an hour-plus ride in the taxi with the taxi driver with a decent command in Mandarin, the trio finally arrived at the hotel in central London. After they got out of the cab and paid the fare, Hao Ren wasn't sure if he got ripped off or not, he couldn't care less at this point. Vivian looked up to the bright sky and went, so many years had passed back then there weren't that many houses around. Didn't you say that humans were still living on trees when you first came to Europe? Hao Ren spat at Vivian as he held Lily who could barely stand straight. You've lived so long. How did you miss the difference between the lifespan of a vampire and that of a human? We are in so much trouble today because I put too much hope in you. Vivian frowned sternly. I have a good temper, but I still have the pride and dignity of a vampire noble. Your constant mockery towards my nobility is. Pay up next month's rent then. You can say whatever you want, as a noble I won't be calculative with you. Hao Ren was speechless. It was his first encounter with a noble who was pushed to desperation by her monthly rentals. As planned, let's rest a day or two, to get rid of the jet lag, reorganize and collate information we have. After that I'll be reporting into Raven 12345. Hao Ren took a deep breath and sighed, based on the address provided by Raven 12345, finding it will not be a walk in the park. Walking towards the hotel entrance, the trio was unaware of the brief, yet intent gaze of a shadowy figure at one of the windows on the 6th floor of the hotel as it quickly drew the curtains back, just as quickly as he pulled them back for a peek. Thanks to the 5-digit white-haired succubus, the over-sufficient fund she provided allowed Hao Ren to enjoy living like a rich man in this foreign country. Though not comparable with the super-rich, to Hao Ren, being able to reserve such a suite of 2 rooms with attached bathrooms and a living room in a luxurious hotel, is already considered as rich. After a bumpy check-in, 3 of them were led by a hotel attendant to the suite they reserved 2 days ago. Upon reaching the room, Lily already was too tired to behave like a human anymore. She was literally crawling her way into the room. Hao Ren could only explain to the stunned attendant. She's just sleepwalking, sleepwalking. The expression of the attendant was quizzical. He probably never seen such a level of sleepwalking. However, the attendant handled it professionally and didn't pursue. After briefing them about the facilities of the suite and the hotel services in comprehensible Mandarin, he left the room. The hotel's advertisement wasn't exaggerated at all. The attendant's proficiency in Mandarin is better than that of your English, said Hao Ren as he turned his head to tease Vivian while dragging Lily into the living room. Check the doors and rooms with your 5 extraordinary senses. Make sure that there aren't any hidden cameras. I don't want to alert the scientists. Vivian was unhappy. After checking the door, she mumbled something and wrote some invisible glyphs on the door and turned to say, "It's done. I will know right away when somebody is approaching." Hao Ren nodded and threw the still sleeping Lily onto the sofa. He then looked around the room and thought, to be honest, this was the classiest hotel room he had ever stayed in. The living room was covered with thick light yellow carpet. The warm luminance of the lamps fell on the wall, giving warmth to the ambience and somehow reassuring. There was a LCD TV and a mini bar at one side of the living room. The other side was decorated with a sofa, a coffee table and seats for guests. There were 2 bedrooms at the north and south end of the suite, each attached with a bathroom. This was necessary as Hao Ren knew that he shouldn't be sharing the same room with the girls. Yet, he dare not let these 2 unreliable girls out of sight. Therefore, the best solution was to reserve this suite with 2 bedrooms for them. As a matter of fact, this was not the best solution as Lily and Vivian might end up fighting each other. However, he couldn't get a more suitable suite with 3 rooms when he was booking. He could only take what's available at the moment. Anyhow, before departing, Vivian and Lily had sworn that they would get along well. Of course, it's still too early to tell. Hao Ren looked around the extravagant suite like a bumpkin, even though it's considered quite basic to the super-rich, and was satisfied. Suddenly, Lily opened her eyes and sat up straight right beside him. She stretched herself deeply and yelled, "Landlord, have we reached the place yet?" Hao Ren looked at the energetic Lily oddly. The bright and beautiful morning sun was slanting through the French windows and fell right on her face. It was 6:30 a.m. in local time. The nap time inherent to Lily's biological clock was just over and this werewolf girl amazingly woke up just on time. "I've got a feeling that we might fail the task," said Hao Ren and sighed. He took out the MDT from his pocket, activated it and searched for the details of the task that Raven 12345 assigned to him. "We will depart 2 days later. It will take 1 day to reach our destination from this place and we are taking the highway which is the shortest route. So the main task for tomorrow is to figure out the map and where the heck is this York Ford." Raven 12345 said she wanted to put us newbies to the test. "I wonder what kind of a test this is, not providing us a more accurate map. York Ford. I can't find it on the map." Lily was wide awake. She was lying beside Hao Ren, looking curiously at the projected image from the MDT. "Hey landlord, we haven't had lunch, have we?" Hao Ren looked at the bright window and said, "It should be breakfast, before or after breakfast. We will eat later. Also, don't call me landlord when we are out. It sounds weird. You can just call me by my name." "Okay, landlord." "I got it, landlord." Hao Ren. Vivian walked around each room in the suite happily. She even went to have a look at the bathroom before returning to the living room, seemingly impressed. She glanced at the hologram floating before her and reminded Hao Ren. "Didn't you say you wanted to report to Raven? Try to ask for more details while you are at it." "Oh yeah, I almost forgot about it." Hao Ren slapped his head. He pinched the edge of the MDT like how he did before and was searching hard in his head for Raven 12345's contact channel. "I hope she goes to work today. She is not too reliable." This time Raven 12345 didn't disappoint Hao Ren. The holographic projection above the MDT flickered and the beautiful woman with beautiful silver hair appeared before Hao Ren. "What's up?" "I've reached UK." Hao Ren looked curious as he realized that the background behind Raven 12345 looked somewhat like outer space. "Where are you?" "UK. What are you doing there?" "Oh yes, I remembered it. I asked you to pick someone up." "How's it?" asked Raven 12345. "Nothing much." Hao Ren have no time to figure out why was there a huge flame of explosion behind Raven 12345. Vivian made a mistake and Lily was sleeping like a dead dog few minutes ago. And that York Ford you told me about does not even exist on the map. Also, none of us can speak English. You don't suppose we can simply find any local chap to be our translator, right, given the secrecy of this mission? What if they find out about the unusual creatures? Can't speak English. It's just a minor problem. Raven 12345's lips didn't move as she spoke. Yet the voice was still coming from the projection. Apparently she was using another method to communicate with Hao Ren when in outer space. Just then a bright explosion flashed in the background of the holographic projection. Rave 12345 turned around and simply threw a dazzling bluish-white ball of light at it. She then turned back and said, "Didn't I tell you to study your MDT, why don't you listen to me? Just enter the app list and look for the translation program." Hao Ren was watching Raven 12345 throwing balls of lightning in space. He was getting more and more curious as to what she was doing out there, but still stick to the question and tried to explain it to her. "I tried to use the translation app, however, it was all about the languages of XX planet and the general dictionary of XX universe. I guess it must be useful when traveling to the other planet, but there's nothing I can use on Earth." Raven 12345 paused for a moment and slapped her head. "Ops. I installed the wrong app. You know how I always find these technological devices confusing. I will instruct the technician to transfer the right translation program to you later. Meanwhile, let me settle this mess over here first." "Just a moment." After she was done talking, Raven 12345 turned to around again and threw out a bright blue electric arc. Hao Ren couldn't estimate how huge that electric arc was through the holographic projection. All he could see was the arc almost took out the whole screen instantly. He was astonished and asked, "What are you really doing? Why does it look so busy over there?" "Oh, I'm just cleaning up the room," said Raven without thinking. "A gang of self-pity lunatics are gearing up to destroy the world. They even created mathematical rates weapons. I have to get rid of them before the damage is done." While Raven 12345 was speaking, Hao Ren noticed that there was a peculiar wreckage as huge as Massif in the background. The wreckage was surrounded by blue blaze. It was disintegrating as it slowly glided across the space. Numerous small spaceship-like objects emerged from the wreckage but were almost instantly shot into oblivion by blue beams coming out of nowhere. Hao Ren knew at once that he should stop asking about it. What Raven 12345 was doing was apparently nothing peaceful. "Okay, where were we just now?" Raven 12345's voice woke Hao Ren up from blank state his mind was in. "Oh, I need to upload a new translation program. Well, you bunch of unofficial guys are really troublesome. After you become an official employee, these programs will be installed into your head directly and you will have a built-in interpretation system wherever you go." Now I finally understand what Raven 12345 meant when she said she was too busy to deal with the trifles of Earth, said Hao Ren after disconnecting from the call. "Her daily job is way too crazy, it's exactly like a scene taken out of a blockbuster movie." "Does she hold grudges?" Vivian, who also saw the space battle, got a little scared of Raven. Although she had no idea about space wars and mathematical rates weapons, she couldn't help but feel that Raven 12345 is the kind of boss you wouldn't want to cross. "Are you sure that you have never offended her before?" "Well, there are times where I called her the white-haired succubus silently inside my head." "Does that count?" asked Hao Ren after contemplating for a while. Vivian was speechless. While Hao Ren was still chatting with Vivian, his MDT suddenly flashed and a message came in directly into his head. "The interpretation program had been sent to you." Hao Ren switched on the MDT and found the interpretation program quickly. In fact, he didn't have to search for it. He just simply gave a command in his mind and the MDT carried out the intended function, bringing up the interpretation program immediately. As he was reading the program manual, Hao Ren licked his lips subconsciously, saying, "The heck? Another high-end product. If I had had this product back then, I wouldn't have to retake the CET 3 times. How is it?" Lily scratched her head while looking at the MDT with much interest. "Does it explain how to use the program?" Hao Ren pointed at the holographic image. It was clearly stated here. The script for the usage of the Universal Adaptive Interpretation app. Accessibility clearance level, F. Accessible to basic level agents or equivalent positions. Connects directly to user's mind upon activation. Simultaneous interpretation inside the mind. Users will not experience lapses in the interpretation process and supports language auxiliary function at the same time. Able to take charge of part of user's language ability and enabling users to engage in barrier-free communication in different languages. Though the above script contained multiple terminology, Hao Ren was able to grasp the general operation of the program just by picking out the few words that he understood from the script. He had to admit that the program was pretty amazing. It was similar to the MDT as both linked directly with the user's mind. As a matter of fact, all of the auxiliary programs in the MDT could do the same. At first he thought the interpretation app was just a text translation program with voice recognition. It can't be helped, the last he checked, that's the best Earth's technology has to offer, isn't it? But he never expected it to be able to link with and work in his mind with any language. There was even a language auxiliary function, which could actually take charge of some parts of the user's language ability. Hao Ren thought at this rate, he could pretend to be a local and actually pull off a flawless London accent. By the way, we can give it a go now. Hao Ren suggested as he noticed a side note stating that there's a built-in language library encompassing the languages of the worlds under the jurisdiction of the Empire. Even Aboriginal languages and those long lost from uncivilized worlds were included in it. He was curious and wanted to test it immediately. He activated the program immediately and confirmed in his mind that the mental port was ready. He then turned to Vivian and said, "You can speak to me in Anglo-Saxon English now, let's see if it works." According to the user's guide, any spoken language on Earth can be translated. Vivian blinked and said, "Is it really so amazing?" "Let's give it a go," said Hao Ren excitedly. "Go ahead." Vivian paused for a moment and said, "I spoke to you in Old English just now, and you replied in Old English as well." Hao Ren was stunned while looking at the MDT. A few moments later, he talked to himself, "Well, it really worked. I don't feel the lapse with the process of interpretation. It even imitates your accent." Lily sat on one side with her arms wrapped around her knees, watching them. She could no longer hide her curiosity and smiled as she walked towards Hao Ren. Landlord, can I give it a try please?" But as soon as Lily takes the MDT over from Hao Ren's hands, the interpretation program stopped. Even though this device is a low accessibility clearance model, there are still rules to follow. Read the line of words appearing on the MDT. You do not meet the functional module's accessibility clearance level, identification failed. Proceeding with this session is against the law. If you really wish to continue, feel free purchase the lock-free downgraded civil model in the City of Shadows. Lily stared at it and asked, "Why then can I access the music player without any problem?" "It's a lock-free function. According to the regulation, you can freely access it." Another line of words appeared. "However, please respect the original setting of this device. Its main function is to execute tasks, not to play music. You can insult the traditional looks of this device, but don't you dare insult the speakers. It's a serious provocation to this device to play in your mind the Little Apple in a loop using the 16-channel mode." Hao Ren looked quizzically at her. Embarrassed, Lily returned the MDT to him. "I was just bored. The other day you left it on the coffee table before going off to prepare lunch for bats. So I took it and used it for a short while." Hao Ren quietly took the MDT back and kept it away. However, he couldn't bear the disappointment on Lily's face. Therefore, he tried to divert her attention. "How about this? Vivian and I have tested the function just now. You can give it a go all you want. Just simply pick any foreign language or dialect. Let's see if it can be translated as well." The idea brightened her up. After Hao Ren was ready, she cleared her throat and said tentatively, "Woof." Hao Ren. Vivian. MDT. This device isn't preloaded with the corresponding glossary." A line of words appeared again on the MDT. "However, according the scenario analysis and the condition your body is in, could what you've just said be food?" Lily hugged her knees and pout, "It was just guessing around, that doesn't count. It's not funny at all. I want to go down to get something to eat." After Lily left the room, Vivian turned to Hao Ren and smirked. "You see, she won't usually admit that she is just a big doggy, but once she opens that mouth of hers, she exposes her true identity." "You can't say that." Hao Ren stuck up a tiny bit for the stupid werewolf of a sister who had always cheered him up. "I told her to speak in some foreign language. Probably barking is a foreign language to werewolves, at the very least it could be a dialect." Hao Ren was amazed by the new function of the MDT. He felt that he could be an expert in any language in no time without any problem. Had he not been lazy, he would have probably disguised himself as the top student in every college of linguistics with the help of this device. However, little did he know that that function was actually the most basic function in the most basic equipment in the Space Administration, and it's considered outdated. The language barrier was a common problem faced by basic-level officers as they inspect each and every space. They were different from the Shiling disciples in that they couldn't directly access all the knowledge via the mental network. The ordinary basic-level officers, which also includes agents, hallowed scions, bishops, and the likes, usually rely on a variety of equipment to solve the difficulties they faced in their tasks. Now the Space Administration was in the process of improving this situation. The solution was to directly integrate some of the functions in the MDT into the Bioenhancement and Reconfiguration program. The first project was to install the interpretation program directly into the brain, which enabled these agents to communicate with any race in any language without any barrier and without the help of any device. It was a pity that Hao Ren didn't join at the right time. He had to get back into that coffin for the second time after the next 2 days. Let's not talk about the things that are yet to come. Hao Ren and Vivian went into the room. What were you thinking? They were just trying to discover the other functions of the MDT. Hao Ren realized at that moment how unreliable Raven 12345 was. That white-haired succuba didn't even know the inner workings of a basic equipment of the Space Administration. It's euphemistic to call her a tech illiterate. Hao Ren wondered if the woman was actually only an exception in the Space Administration. Anyway, in order to avoid similar problems in the future, Hao Ren must find out if there were any other problems with this equipment in his hands. Oh my, did he found another one? It was an app called the Encyclopedia of Antenatal Care for 37 Races, was pre-installed in the date repository in the weaponry folder. This was literally Hao Ren's expression, confused face. Can the 5-digit crazy goddess still carry out her duties reliably? Imagine one day I am on the brink of death on the battlefield, requesting for backup, and all I've got is 2 prams descending from the sky. And for whom, I wonder? After nearly an hour, Hao Ren finally sussed it out. There were no major problems with the MDT, but somehow, it was marred with glitches. A tech noob himself, Hao Ren was nonetheless quick to notice the anomaly. There were many functions which he could not make head or tail of. Plus, information about them was just next to nothing. He had tried his luck with the MDT's AI, but the AI knew no better than him. After all, the AI would not question Raven 12345's order. The problem was, the programs ordered by Raven 12345 were not native to the MDT. Every MDT distributed at the grassroots level went through a process of initialization first. So by right, every MDT should have came out identical right out of the box. However, local management was given the discretion to install locale-specific programs. Such examples were the Localized Biological Encyclopedia, Localized Interstellar Navigation Map, Antenatal Care Guide for Female Agents, and the like. The central information vault of the Shiling Empire was a master record of everything, no matter how bizarre or small, one could find it there. Due to this, there was an endless list of programs which could be downloaded into the MDT. Clearly, this was the source of the problem. Raven 12345, Hao Ren's regional chief, was one fry short of a happy meal, and technologically speaking, she was a dummy. However, she had given orders to download a hell of a lot of programs and had also meddled with the MDT before it was passed on to Hao Ren. Hao Ren and Vivian were staring at a huge PT 385 Encyclopedia of the Universe in the MDT, a compilation of 2,000 volumes to be exact. They were flabbergasted. Deletion of anything from the MDT required access of higher authorization. I suggest you make do with it. The holographic message read. All functions of the MDT are intact and working fine. You only have to control your compulsion and ignore the spams. And a replacement will be no better, as Raven 12345 would certainly toy with the replacement unit again before you get your hands on it. A check with the local network message board has confirmed such incidents and complaints related to this MDT issue have gone through the roof. She's one hell of a woman. Alright, I give up. As long as you get me what I want, I'll just turn a blind eye to all the nonsense. Ignorance is bliss, right? Dear user, don't worry. You will be in good hands with me. I am as powerful as you can imagine. The AI was narcissistic. Hao Ren would someday come to the realization that ignoring it was the best decision he had ever made. Let's go downstairs and grab some bites. Hao Ren tucked the MDT into his pocket before checking out the antique clock standing at the corner. Lily's been gone for an hour, is she lost? The hotel serves breakfast, and that big dog's a gourmand. She must be gorging on the food as we speak. She's a loser, Vivian quipped. Hao Ren shrugged without a word and led Vivian out of the room. They entered a restaurant at the first floor of the hotel. England was a slow-paced country where people lived a laid-back lifestyle. Typical English folk would start their day at 9 in the morning and have their first meal of the day. Such a lifestyle was alien to Hao Ren. Plus, he was still plagued by jet lag. There were a few guests at the breakfast buffet section. There was no mistaking that Lily was sitting right there, alone at her table in the middle of the restaurant. Vivian was spot on about Lily being a gourmand. Lily was seen cleaning up plate after plate of food and there was no sign of her slowing down. Hao Ren blinked. It seems the rumor that spices aren't available in England isn't true at all considering how much food Lily has gobbled up. Vivian looked on with disdain. She's just an omnivore. Holding a plate in his hand, Hao Ren proceeded to the long buffet line. He ambled around and noticed that not all English food was unpalatable. At least, he had no difficulty in filling his plate with edible items from the choices available. He then lumbered over to Lily and sat next to her, inquiring curiously, "Are you done yet?" Yup. Lily tried to speak with her mouth full. "The salad isn't bad, same goes for the fruits. But I'm not really fond of the barbecue meat. They don't taste like the ones back home." Hao Ren stared into her eyes and muttered, "As a werewolf, don't you feel ashamed of your choice of food?" It seemed like Lily did not get the message. She exclaimed, "They don't sell ribs over here." Hao Ren felt they were not really on the same wavelength. He turned over to Vivian and was confounded. "Now, that's like a pot calling the kettle black." Vivian almost overfilled her plate and it looked like a small hill. As if it began raining after a long drought, she could not care less about table manners and etiquette. She just wanted to fulfill her long-deprived desire or rather appetite, after living on a budget for so long. "I've never had a life like this," the vampire girl babbled with her mouth full. "I'd like to enjoy as much as I can while it lasts." Hao Ren was relieved at the fact that the English started their day late and also, there were only a handful of waitresses on duty at that time. Otherwise, the scene of the two gobblers trying to out-eat each other would have been too embarrassing to be witnessed. As they were going at it, a man holding a plate in his hand approached. Hao Ren heard him utter in a soft voice, "Is this seat taken?" Hao Ren looked up. The stranger was slender, he had short hair and he wore a white top with black pants. He was not particularly handsome by any standard but exuded an air of trustworthiness and aptness in him. The man had an unmistakably oriental face which Hao Ren could almost tell was Chinese. "Please have a seat, it's not taken." Hao Ren invited the men to take the vacant seat across the table. He was a little puzzled though, most tables in the restaurant were empty at that time. Why did this stranger choose to sit with them? He heightened his guard and sized the men up carefully. He was mindful of his so-called covert mission and became alert. Vivian had also come to notice the presence of the men. As she became self-conscious, she slowed down her pace. Her mannerisms switched to Duchess of Cambridge mode, elegant and graceful, save for the oil stain on the corner of her mouth. "It's kind of rare to see someone from my home country here." The man was cordial and friendly despite his appearance implying otherwise. "Are you here for holiday?" "Home country." Hao Ren did not expect to be so damn right. The translation program had prevented him from recognizing the man's accent outright until the man divulged his origin. "Oh, you're from China too?" "Yup, I'm a native Chinese but I spend most my time globe-trotting." The tall man guffawed. "I'm happy to see my fellow countrymen here. If it's not too much trouble, do you mind if I join you guys?" "Not at all." Hao Ren waved his hands. "That's great." The man nodded and unexpectedly uttered, "Are you searching for a place called York Ford?" "Are you looking for a place called York Ford?" The stranger man's inadvertent question threw Hao Ren and Vivian off guard. With hundreds of years as a veteran vampire under her belt, Vivian managed to hide her surprise but Hao Ren had it written all over his face. "How did you know that?" Hao Ren's muscles tensed up, his fists clenched tightly as if he was about to draw his sword out from its scabbard. Of course he had no sword. He was ready to improvise by picking up a chair or something he could grab within his reach as a weapon. In reality, there were no threats in the slightest. He was only paranoid because he had drawn himself too deep into his own imagination of a James Bond scenario. Coming from a humble, peasant background and going on his first ever covert mission, Hao Ren was nervous as well as paranoid. Anyone walking on two legs in a 200-meter radius was an imaginary threat. The tall and slender man smiled, after which he pointed at Lily. I overheard what the lady said earlier as she was asking around about York Ford. Although she was speaking in Chinese, the waitresses and I could understand it. So, I was just curious. Why are you looking for that place? Hao Ren gave Lily a sideways stare, but she was so obsessed with her meal, she did not even notice. For all intents and purposes, she could not be justifiably blamed for her conspicuous recon method. They knew that York Ford did not exist on modern maps. They could only take an educated guess of the location and its distance from London based on the bits and pieces supplied by Raven 12345. Other than that, not much could have been done except asking around. Lily had assumed that the MDT was simultaneously interpreting her words. She did not realize that the simultaneous interpreter did not work for her and she was only heard speaking in Chinese. We're here on holiday. Vivian took a break from her meal but had maintained her graceful manners. She chimed in, trying to save Hao Ren from botching their cover. Well, actually, we aren't fond of the usual tourist places, but we're more interested in little-known spots in the remote countryside for a little exploration. We came to read about a place called York Ford a while back, so we thought it might be a good idea to explore the place a bit while we're here in England. But it seems that it is unknown even to the locals. Hao Ren secretly gave Vivian a thumbs up. He thought, at least, that inept blood-sucking creature is finally being useful. And clearly, she's a good liar too. Under the guise of the table, Vivian reciprocated a victory sign. She had learned the fine art of lying ever since the invention of cuneiform script and had been good at it too. The man looked at them but was not suspicious of anything. He continued, "Oh, I see. Obviously, that place has somehow become famous lately. However, you won't find that place, at least, not by the name of York Ford." "You mean, you do know the place?" Lily chimed in eagerly. Her ears stood erect as she jolted her head upwards. The sauce on the salad jutting out from her mouth almost splattered onto the man's face. "You're going too?" "Yeah, I guess we can travel together." The man smiled. A few hundred years ago, York Ford was an estate where members of the nobility lived. Somehow, it was left deserted and it fell into ruin in the course of a few hundred years. Since then, no one has ever remembered or mentioned it. It was forgotten, save for entries in a few professional, geographic publications. So how you got to know about the name is beyond me. Nevertheless, Brewshire, a small town which was built at the south, is the closest point to the ruins. F***ck me. Hao Ren was appalled. How stupid could the white-haired succubus get? It's the name of a 100-year-old decaying estate. Vivian echoed, "Yeah, damn right. The information is so outdated." Hao Ren glanced at her, chiding, "Shut up, you old English." Vivian lowered her head awkwardly, but Lily overheard the chide. She looked up and asked curiously, "Old English? What old English?" Lily had no clue. She was still in a somnambulistic state when Vivian slipped up. "Freeze your teeth and give your tongue a sleigh ride." Hao Ren pushed Lily's head back down and turned to face the men with a surprised look. "What a coincidence. I was worried about how we would ever get there until I met you. You're going there for business or leisure?" Hao Ren could not deny the fact that he was pleasantly surprised. He was prepared to spend the entire of the following day scouting for anything about York Ford. The appearance of this man who claimed to know about York Ford had actually made things easier for him. Yet at the same time, he had his doubts. It was too much of a coincidence. According to the men, York Ford was an estate owned by some members of nobility during the medieval kingdom period. However, it had been deserted, forgotten, and had almost disappeared from the surface of the earth a long time ago. Even if there was a settlement built near the original ruins later on, there were no indications of any historical or cultural connections between the two. Considering all these things, gathering of information would have been extremely difficult and time-consuming. So, that leaves the question, was the man being genuine? Hao Ren's feeling had turned from a pleasant surprise to outright skepticism, but he had concealed this switch rather well this time. Hao Ren appeared passionate and the men did not suspect a thing. "For business. My job requires me to travel frequently, especially to places of historical interest. You're a tomb raider. Hao Ren suddenly felt a sharp pain on his feet. Vivian had stamped his foot. About my job. The men suddenly sounded reluctant before steering away from the topic of conversation. Have you heard news about York Ford? What news? Hao Ren quickly realized something. Irrespective of what news came out from the place, his mission was going to tank. He was supposed to meet an unusual creature in York Ford. Drawing people's attention to it was an absolute no-no. There is a castle in York Ford, abandoned and in ruin, the men said in a mystic tone of voice. It's not a tourist attraction and it's supposed to stay that way. However, news of paranormal activities have broke out recently. There were claims of sightings of mysterious lights, fire burning at the top of the ruins and knights in full battle armor lurking around in the evening. According to the locals, it could be the haunted spirits of the noblemen, noblewomen, and knights who once lived there. The place has now become somewhat famous because of that. The men narrated the story in such vivid details. The story exuded a strong, spooky air between each punctuation, sending chills down everyone's spine. But thanks to the werewolf and the vampire, Hao Ren was kind of immune to it. At that moment, he had only one thing on his mind: could the paranormal phenomena have something to do with his new tenant? Hao Ren pondered. If the paranormal events were true as claimed, then his tenant could very well be a... What the F***ck? Could the white-haired succubus not send him some normal tenants? Then again, any human in his right mind would never stay in his house for obvious reasons. That's your job. Hao Ren gave the men a curious glance. He had a goddamn feeling that the paranormal story had something to do with the man's appearance before them. The men smiled shyly. It may sound absurd, but actually, I'm a demon hunter.